Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
This is part 1 of the video. Listen until part 2.
Did the protagonist's criminal partners help or did they not? Today's story has a similar plot. Enjoy the show! On April 7th, 2019, he experienced the same thing over and over again, a bright flash of light followed by searing pain, then darkness. He heard voices from time to time, but he couldn't make out who they were or what they were saying. He tried to speak but could not. He tried to move but was unable to. However, this time the light was different. It was like looking through fog, but he couldn't see anything and couldn't focus on anything. Foggy figures passed in front of him, and he tried to call out to them but could not. He began to hear sounds, but nothing he heard made sense. He forced himself to move but couldn't. He tried to scream, but nothing came out. Exhausted, he stopped to rest, and the darkness took possession of him again. After some time, he didn't know how much time had passed, the light returned. He forced himself to move and was finally able to do it, but it took all his strength. He tried to scream, but only a painful wheeze came out of his throat. He felt as if something was stuck in his throat, preventing him from speaking. A shadow flashed in front of him, paused for a moment, and then disappeared with a loud sound. He saw more shadows. This time, they came closer and surrounded him. He blinked, hoping to clear his vision. The shadows moved quickly around him, doing something he didn't understand. Then he heard someone speak. "Mr. Smith, can you hear me?" asked a male voice. Who the hell is this Mr. Smith, he thought. However, he heard the man and tried to nod. It took a lot of effort, but he finally managed to nod weakly. As his vision began to clear, he realized that he was in a hospital room. People around him, all in medical gowns, were desperately trying to bring him back to consciousness. The man he presumed was a doctor said something about checking if he could breathe on his own. Soon, he felt the tape being removed from his face and something being pulled out of his throat. Gasping for breath, he suddenly realized that his throat was free of the obstruction, and he took several tentative breaths, enjoying the feeling of inhaling air on his own. Okay, the man said. Looking around, he noticed multiple wires attached to his body, along with a blood pressure cuff on his upper arm and 4 inserted into his lower arm. Looking at the wall, he saw the thinnest television he had ever seen in his life and noticed a ticker on the screen that mentioned something about President Trump. Trump, he asked himself. How long had he been here? The last thing he remembered was that Barack Obama had only been in the White House for a few months. How long? He asked weakly. The doctor looked at his thick chart before answering. About 10 years, as far as I can tell, Mr. Smith. 10 years? What the hell happened? And who is this Smith that everyone is talking about, he thought. Just relax, Mr. Smith. We'll run some tests and get you ready for rehab. As he watched the nurses free his arms and legs from the straps holding him to the bed, the doctor scribbled notes. He looked at another nurse before speaking. Do we have Mr. Smith's contact information? The young nurse checked the computer and answered in the affirmative. Very well, contact them and let them know. The nurse started calling, and the man wondered who would come to see him. His memory was still a little hazy, but he remembered that he was married and had an 8-year-old daughter. My God, he thought. My daughter, Jenny, should now be 18 years old and probably getting ready to go to college. He thought about his wife, Lydia, but for some reason, he did not want to see her. Something about the sight of her made him feel disgusted and angry. Well, Mr. Smith, the doctor said, your vital signs are normal, but we'll still run some tests. As soon as we get the results, we will remove your feeding tube and transfer you to the ward. You will stay with us for a while, but we will send you to rehab and get you back on your feet, okay? The man nodded. Doctor, he said, who is Smith? The doctor looked at his notes before looking back at him. It's you, he said. You seem to have amnesia. I'm not surprised, really. You've been through a lot. It's okay, we will invite a specialist who will work with you. For now, just relax, and we'll get you ready. With that, the doctor left, giving instructions to several nurses on the way out. The man knew who he was, and it wasn't some Smith. His name was Avery Wilson. He was born in 1972 to Dan and Barbara Wilson. He had a brother, Robert, who was a year older than him. He joined the Army at 18, straight out of high school, and was trained as a sniper. He spent the next 4 years in various hotspots around the world, including Kuwait. He survived Operation Desert Storm and finally left the military in 1994, returning to Southern California, where he earned an associate's degree in criminal justice in 1996. He had always wanted to become a police officer, so he joined the Los Angeles Police Department, where his military training came in handy. After graduating from the police academy in 1997, he was assigned as a sniper. He met Lydia Jackson, and 2 years later, they married in 1999. Everything was fine, he thought, and their daughter, Jennifer, was born in October 2000. He continued his police service while his wife worked as a lawyer in the same firm where his brother was a partner. At the end of 2008, he won a large sum in the lottery, and from then on, everything went wrong. Around the same time he won the lottery, he accidentally discovered that his wife had been cheating on him for a long time with his brother. Luckily, his good friend and confidant, Ben Jacobs, persuaded him to open an account abroad under a different name so that Lydia could not access most of his winnings. Ben, being an expert in financial matters, managed his account. He also introduced him to a real bar shark who hated unfaithful spouses and despised Robert even more. He organized surveillance of Lydia and Robert and was able to obtain photographs and videos of their meetings. He planned to confront his wife about her infidelity, but something happened. He couldn't remember the details of that night, but he was sure they would come back to him soon. The next thing he remembered was waking up in this hospital 10 years later. Exhausted, he laid his head back and watched TV while the nurses did their work. But who was this Smith? What did it all mean? He pondered his life as he watched the local news. One Robert Wilson has reportedly announced his intention to run for public office, he heard. He wondered if Robert Wilson could be his brother. He watched as a well-dressed man with gray hair spoke to a group of people outside a building in downtown Los Angeles. Standing next to him were two women, Lydia and a teenager who looked like an adult version of his daughter, Jenny. "And I promise the people of this great state that I will bring ethics and responsibility back to our government," Robert said to applause. "Sacramento is out of control, and we need to get back to basics." After that, Robert turned and kissed Lydia on the cheek. She was 2 years younger than Avery, and he thought she had the best looks money could buy. Wilson, who was accompanied by his wife and daughter, made his announcement this afternoon and is already leading in the polls. Since his brother Avery tragically died in a shooting in 2009, Wilson has been actively involved with the families of fallen police officers, the newscaster said, showing a photo of Avery in a police uniform. "What the hell?" the man thought, looking at the report. "Dead? I'm not dead," he told himself. "And what is this nonsense about Jenny being Robert's daughter?" He laid his head back on the pillow and tried to remember the last few days before he ended up in the hospital, but his mind kept coming back blank. His thoughts went back to the major events of his life, hoping to find an answer. He thought about Robert, his older brother. For as long as he could remember, Robert had been his constant tormentor. He not only mocked him but also took pleasure in taking everything he could from his younger brother: money, recognition for his services, his belongings, even his girlfriends. It seemed that whatever Avery had, Robert wanted, whether he needed it or not. What made it even worse was that their parents always supported Robert. If Robert did something wrong, he always turned the situation around so that their parents ended up punishing their youngest son. Avery grew up hating his older brother, and the situation with their parents did not help at all. Robert was the good son, sure to succeed, while Avery remained the black sheep. It was so bad that he didn't even tell his family he had joined the army. He had just finished school and was heading to the base the next day to sign his enrollment papers. The day after graduation, he passed all medical examinations and was ready to leave. No one even knew where he was until he was forced to call home. "You did what?" his father fumed when Avery called. "Come home now, young man. I'm already over 18, and I'm in the basic course." "You can't do anything about it," Avery responded. "Don't expect to hear from me again." With those words, he hung up, ending the conversation. He kept his word and did not contact them until he graduated from the police academy in 1997. True, it was not his decision. They heard about his release from the LAPD and came to see the event. He will never forget that day. He noticed them while standing in line. After the speeches, they stood up to receive their certificates, and he saw them, including Robert, watching him become a new police officer. After the ceremony, he tried to leave as quickly as possible, but he was stopped when they blocked his path, and they didn't have happy faces. "You won't run away from us again, Avery," his father said. "I knew you would finally do something worthy. I was hoping you would go to college and become a lawyer like your brother." Robert grinned, but the smile quickly disappeared from his face. "Yeah, well, it's my choice, and it's something you can't take away from me," Avery said, looking at Robert. "And FYI, I did do something worthwhile in the military." "Avery, please," his mother, Barbara, said. "We haven't seen or heard from you for 7 years." Can't you just be polite to us for once? Maybe if just once you and my father had given me some support, things would have been different. But no, you always listened to him, always took his side in everything, and never gave me a chance, he said. This is my day, and I won't let you ruin it. Avery, Robert said, I don't understand. Why do you hate me so much? Are you kidding me? You were a damn bully. You took everything I had from me, even my girls. He said. You accused me of all the bad things you did and made them believe all your lies, he added, pointing at his parents. His parents were shocked by his words. He was always so quiet and polite. Who was this man in front of them, they wondered. So guess what, idiot? I'm done with you. I have paid my debts and am building my life, so stay away from me, he told Robert, his eyes burning with hatred. Avery, son, what happened to you? Asked his mother, shocked by her son's language. This was not the quiet man who endured everything they threw at him. He looked at his mother. I've grown up, Mom, he said. I became a soldier. And you know what? I even killed people. She retreated a little after these words. He continued, Don't worry, Mom, they were bad people and they deserved it. I'm not the same person I was when I lived in your house, and I won't take any crap from anyone. He looked at Robert before continuing, Never. He then turned and walked away from them, leaving them with their jaws dropped. He didn't see them again until the day he married Lydia. He met her at a police event shortly after he became a cop. At the time, she was working in the public defender's office but was looking for a job with a large firm. He proposed to her a year after they met, and she accepted. They decided to date for a long time to make sure everything would work out and got married a year later. Divorce among police officers was quite common. He didn't invite his family to the wedding, but they showed up anyway. He saw them during the reception when Lydia pointed them out. Isn't this your family? She asked, pointing to his parents and Robert. Yes, he said. I don't know why they're here. You should introduce me to them, please, she begged. Avery gave in and took his fiancée to them. They smiled as Avery introduced his wife. Well, it's finally nice to meet you, Avery's father said. I don't understand, Avery. Why didn't we get an invitation to your wedding? Asked his mother. It must have been an oversight or something, Avery said. In fact, he simply didn't invite them. I heard that you will be joining our firm soon, Dan said. Avery was stunned as Lydia looked at him. Oh, sorry. Didn't you know? The council just passed it today. No, I didn't, Avery said as Robert chuckled. Sorry, Avery, I just found out I was accepted, Lydia said. Avery nodded. It's okay, honey, he said. We'll discuss this later. Can I dance with my new daughter-in-law? Robert asked with a cheeky grin. Avery pulled him aside and spoke in a low tone so no one else would hear. Listen, he told his older brother, this is not school. She is my wife, not a schoolgirl. I understand, Robert said dismissively. No, you don't understand. Do you know what I did in the army? Avery asked. Robert shook his head. No? I guess you were some kind of clerk or something, Robert said. No, I was a sniper. I killed idiots like you for a living, Avery said. Robert's grin disappeared, and he looked at his little brother in amazement. Is that a threat, Avery? He asked. Avery shook his head. No, idiot, that's a promise, he said. Okay, Avery, I get it, Robert said, raising his hands. Message received. They returned to Lydia, and his parents asked, Can I ask you to dance? Robert asked in a respectful tone. Lydia looked at Avery, who nodded in permission. What did you tell him? His father asked when they left. I gave him some brotherly advice, Avery said as he watched his wife and brother dance. He was glad to see that they kept a respectful distance from each other. He turned to his father. You know, Robert always managed to steal girls from me when we were in school, he said. I know, Avery, his father said. Believe me, I did not approve of this. Yeah, well, you didn't do anything to stop it either, even when he bullied me right in front of you, Avery told him. This is different. She's my wife, and I damn well expect you to adhere to your firm's code of ethics. I understand, Avery, his father said. I'll take care of it personally. I'll make sure it stays that way. Avery said, when his wife and brother returned, as they left the reception for their honeymoon in Las Vegas, Avery turned to see Robert and his father discussing something quietly. Glancing at them, he hoped for the best, but experience taught him to expect the worst. On the way to Vegas, Lydia talked to him about his relationship with his family. "You know, your brother is really a very charming person," she said. "He even asked me to call him Bobby. He said that all his friends call him that." "But you don't call him that, and he's your brother," she added. Avery told her about his childhood, how his brother took everything he had, even his girlfriends. He told her about the punishments and bans he received for the things his brother did, and how his parents always sided with Robert over him. "And so when it was time to leave, I did," he said. "I left it all behind and built my life." "Oh my God," Lydia said. "I couldn't even imagine. And they never mentioned you?" "Honestly, if I had known about all this, I would never have applied to their firm." "It's okay," Avery told her, "but forewarned is forearmed. Be careful with Robert, he's a problem. And yes, his charm is just a tool to get his way. Trust me, I've seen this too many times." "You can trust me, honey," she said. "I will never do anything to hurt you." He believed her, but he lived by the principle of trust but verify. He kept an eye on her, what she wore to work, how long she stayed late, how she smelled when she got home, and her general demeanor. 2 years after their wedding, Jenny was born. She was his little girl and could always cheer him up. Lydia also turned out to be an excellent mother. For the first few years, his wife showed no signs that anything was wrong. Even at various company parties and events, he began to warm up to his parents a little and allowed them to spend time with their granddaughter. But he still continued to monitor the situation. If something happened, they hid it very well. He met Ben Jacobs, a true jack of all trades who did everything from financial planning to private investigation, at a police seminar in San Diego in November 2008. They hit it off immediately, especially since Ben was also an Army veteran. They became close friends, and Avery felt he could trust this man with his life. It was then that he first learned of Lydia's betrayal. The previous Christmas, he bought 2 new Apple iPhones, which had a virtual keyboard and allowed him to send text messages. He kept one for himself and gave the other to her, thinking they would help them stay connected no matter where they were. He was driving home to Los Angeles County when his phone beeped, signaling a new message. He looked at the screen and was stunned by what he saw. "Have a great time tonight, lover. See you tomorrow," the message read. He checked that the message really came from Lydia's phone and put the phone away. Although he didn't know who this lover was, he suspected it was Robert, since he didn't know anyone else she might be seeing the next day and knew that they often worked together on various projects and affairs. He needed to come up with a plan before he got home, so he pulled off the highway in Orange County and called Ben. "Hey Avery, what's wrong?" asked Ben. "Then I received a strange message on my phone, and I need help. Do you think you can be my private investigator for a while?" he asked. "Sure, but it will cost," Ben said. "Yeah, okay," Avery replied. He explained what happened, and Ben said he would start an investigation. "In the meantime, don't do anything stupid," Ben warned. "Don't you dare do anything stupid to your brother. Do you hear me?" "Yes, I hear you," Avery said. "Give me some time. It might take a while to gather evidence that you can use against them, especially if they've been so careful so far." "Okay, keep me posted," Avery said. "Definitely," Ben said as he ended the call. "How could she?" Avery asked himself. He held back his tears, but in the end, he couldn't stand it. Even now, remembering that day, his eyes filled with tears. The nurse's voice brought him back to reality. "Are you okay, Mr. Smith?" asked the nurse. He suddenly realized he was crying and wiped his eyes. "Yes," he croaked through dry lips. "Can I have something to drink?" "Of course, Mr. Smith." "I'll be right back," she said, heading towards the aid station. She returned a moment later with a cup of ice water. While he was sipping the water, a doctor entered the room. "Well, Mr. Smith, we have good news," he said. "All your tests are fine, so we'll remove your feeding tube and move you to a room." Several nurses entered the room and began working. He was soon moved to a separate room where he was able to eat real food for the first time in a decade. He watched the news while he ate, and when he finished, he heard a knock on the door. "Come in," he said, his voice still weak. "Johnny." "How are you, old man?" said the man who entered. Avery looked at him and didn't recognize him at first. "It's me, Ben. Remember?" "Yes, I was just thinking about you," he said. Ben sat down next to Avery's bed and placed a suitcase on his lap, closing the door. "How do you feel?" he asked, opening the suitcase. Avery nodded. "Weak but gaining strength," he said. "Tell me, Ben, what the hell happened?" Why does everyone call me Mr. Smith, and why did you call me Johnny? Because Avery Wilson died 10 years ago, Ben said. Avery, or John, looked at him in shock. What? How? He asked. But I'm alive. Ben shook his head. No, Avery is dead, he said. Your name is John Smith. According to officials, Avery was killed during a robbery when he returned home to pick up his belongings. How much do you remember? The man shook his head. Ben pulled out his laptop and placed it in front of him. Watch this, he said, turning on the video. The video showed Lydia, Robert, and Dan in a hotel room discussing a plan to take down Avery. Lydia mentioned that Avery would be coming the next day to pick up the remaining items, to which Dan replied that it would be a good time to wrap things up. He asked Robert if he had the determination to kill his own brother, to which Robert confidently replied that he had long wanted to do this. Dan stressed the importance of making it look like a robbery, and Robert assured him that everything was under control. In the next video, Avery was captured, and Robert mocked him, revealing that Avery's daughter was actually his. The video then showed Robert decisively putting his plan into action by setting up the robbery scene. The footage later continued with Avery's body being taken away by paramedics, with Lydia and Robert playing the roles of grief-stricken relatives. So, you had a video of Robert shooting me, but you didn't do anything about it? Asked John. I had no choice, Ben said. The feds told me to bury it. The fact is that your father and brother were under investigation due to their connections with some shady characters in organized crime. John asked, who do you think is funding your brother's campaign for state senate? Ben nodded. Among other things, he said. So how did I survive? Asked John. Apparently, someone upstairs loves you very much, Ben said. There was a lot of damage, but fortunately, Robert turned out to be a better lawyer than the shooter. It was truly a medical miracle that you survived at all. If you hadn't gone into a coma, the feds would have hidden you under witness protection. But they managed to make it look like you were dead. They even retrieved a body that looked just like you for burial. Was Lydia there? Asked John. Ben laughed and nodded his head. Oh yes, she played the part of the grieving widow to the fullest, Ben said. John laughed. What about Jennifer? He asked. She's going to college soon, Ben said. She misses you very much and blames her mother for what happened. She is quite resourceful, you would be very proud of her. So, who paid for all this? Asked John. Well, do you remember that lottery ticket you won? He asked. John nodded his head. If you remember, you trusted me with this, so I made some investments and put it all in an offshore account. It's grown quite a bit, and that's what paid for your hospital stay and will last you for the rest of your life if you're careful. Thank you for that, John said. My pleasure, Ben said. So what do you think will happen next? I'd like to see my daughter, John said. And I need to get revenge on those who did this to me, all of them. Ben nodded his head. I understand, he said. I had a feeling you might say that. They talked for some more time and discussed their plans for the future, including revenge on their parents, Lydia, Robert, and Avery. John even considered using his sniper skills against them, but Ben talked him out of it. Wouldn't you rather see them suffer a little first? Ben asked, an evil smile appearing on his face. What's on your mind? Asked John, his mood brightening considerably when Ben laid out a potential plan. By the time Ben left, John was in a great mood. He even embraced his new identity with a vengeance. Oh yes, he thought to himself. They will all pay for what they did to me. He spent the next few days in the hospital, getting stronger every day. He mentally mulled over the events that led to his murder. He remembered the last days of his past life, December 2008. After Avery received a text message from Lydia, he allowed Ben to install hidden cameras and microphones in his house. Ben went all out and even installed hidden microphones in his wife's car. He had no idea where these devices were, which he thought was probably a good idea. Then, somehow, Ben managed to install hidden cameras in their offices. He didn't know how his friend managed it and didn't ask. 2 weeks after receiving the message, he received an email from a friend asking him to come to his office. Hey, Avery, Ben said as he walked in and shook hands. Are you ready for this? Avery shook his head. I don't know, he said. Ben nodded his head in understanding. It's not pretty, he said, holding out a large stack of photographs that showed Lydia and Robert in various compromising positions. As far as he could tell, all of their dates took place either in a hotel room or in their office. It took everything he had not to get sick. That's not all, Ben said, starting up a video on his computer. You know he tried really hard to hide all of this from Avery, but you know he'll find out very soon. Lydia said, he may be a Boy Scout, but he's not stupid." Robert and his father laughed. "You're welcome," Robert said condescendingly. "We've been doing this for 5 or 6 years. He still doesn't understand it. We could probably do it right in front of him, and he wouldn't know what was going on." Dan laughed. "Maybe we should introduce him to this Christmas," he said. "How about this? After dinner this Christmas, we'll toss him something and let him have a look. We'll give him a little incentive, and if he doesn't agree with the program, we'll go back to Plan B." "Plan B?" asked Lydia. "You mean let our friends from the East kill him?" "Something like that," Dan said. "You know your husband is not the only sniper." Lydia laughed. "Do you think Barb will agree to this?" asked Lydia. "Who do you think came up with this idea?" Dan said. Lydia raised her glass. "Well then, here's to Barb and Christmas dinner," she said, smiling. The two men joined her. After the video ended, Avery felt even worse. "Oh my God," he said. "They're all in on this, even my mother." "Avery, you need to be very careful from now on," Ben said. "There are other videos here, and they are still just as bad. Until now, they have been very careful." Ben pulled out a business card. "I have taken the liberty of turning you over to the meanest divorce lawyer in the area. I have already given her the evidence that I showed you," he said. "Use my phone and make an appointment. She is waiting for your answer." Avery called and made an appointment with the lawyer for that afternoon. "What about their plot to get me out?" Avery asked. "I provided this information to the FBI," Ben said, "but I'm not sure anything will come of it. Now let's just talk. There is no evidence that anything was actually organized. The point is, Avery, you need to be very careful. Act normal if you can. I know it will be hard, but you have to protect yourself. Anyway, stay in touch, and I'll let you know if I hear anything else." Avery thanked his friend and went to see his lawyer. He arrived at the office of Sally McIntosh, his lawyer. The administrator let him in after he introduced himself. "Good afternoon, Officer Wilson," Sally said, shaking his hand. "Please call me Avery," he said. "Only if you call me Sally," she replied. She took out a large folder and got down to business. Avery was impressed. "I have already spoken to Ben, and he has provided me with the evidence he has collected. I have to tell you, this is probably the most confusing situation I've ever seen in my career. So, what do you expect from this?" "Well, I would like custody of my daughter if she is truly mine, and I don't want to pay her any support. I would also like to pursue action against Robert and my ex-parents," he said. Sally nodded her head. "You know California is a no-fault state when it comes to divorce. We can file an irreconcilable differences claim and use the evidence as leverage in dividing the property. As for custody, I'm afraid you'll be at a disadvantage here, since most judges in this state favor the mother. However, given your wife's income, there is a chance that you can avoid paying alimony. We can make this argument and see what the judge says." "What about Robert and the rest of my family?" Avery asked. "Unfortunately, California law does not allow suits to be filed on the basis of alienation of affection. We may be able to find other grounds to sue, but I'm not sure anything will come of it," she said. "Okay," Avery said. "Do what you need to do. When do you want her to be notified?" Sally asked. Avery thought for a moment. "At Christmas," he said. "At my parents' house." Sally laughed. "You are cold-blooded," she said. "Divorce for Christmas? I like it. Given what I have seen, I will also add an order of protection prohibiting her and your family from coming near you." "Thank you," Avery said. "I'm so sorry you're going through this, Avery." "You seem like a good person," Sally said as she ended the meeting. Avery left the office in a state of shock, processing everything he had seen and heard. Never in his life would he have thought that his family would be against him by participating in such a conspiracy. Lydia felt that something was wrong and tried to approach him. "What happened, dear?" she asked. Avery shook his head, not believing his ears. "I just have a lot on my mind," he said. "One of my friends found out that his wife was cheating on him. He's taking it very hard." "I'm really sorry to hear that," she said. "I would never do something like that to you." "Of course," he thought. "You know that, right?" He looked at her before shaking his head again. "I hope I never have to find out," he said in a monotone voice. Lydia wasn't sure how to take it. "Does he know something?" she thought. He remained in his office after she left and began to review the evidence Ben had provided. He shook his head in disbelief. "Are you going to bed?" asked Lydia. Avery shook his head and waved her off. I have a lot on my mind. Go to sleep, he said. He ended up falling asleep on the couch in his office. Lydia woke him up the next morning. Why didn't you come to bed last night? She asked. I was waiting for you to have some fun, he said, looking at her in disbelief. I was just going through some things in my head. Well, you remember we're having our office Christmas party tonight, right? She asked. He nodded. I'll meet you in the office around 4:30 p.m. I hope your mood will improve by then. Yes, of course, he said. She leaned in to kiss him, but he offered his cheek to her. I love you, she said, leaving the room. Yes, and I love you too, he said without much enthusiasm. He knows something, she thought as she left. That evening, Avery went to his wife's Christmas party, which was always held at the office where she worked. Robert met him as he entered. Well, look who it brought, he said, his speech slightly slurred from alcohol. Avery declined the offer of a drink and took a bottle of water. What, are you too nice to drink with us now? Asked Robert. I'm still on duty, Avery said, and I hope you're not planning on driving tonight. What is little brother going to do, arrest me? Robert said. Only if you break the law, Avery replied. Lydia and their father approached them. Lydia tried to kiss him, but he turned away. Avery is threatening to arrest me, Robert said. Can you believe this? Dan looked at him. I probably would have arrested you too, after all the drinking you've had, Dan said. He reached out to shake Avery's hand. It's good to see you, son. Come on in and join the party. Avery kept his hand on the gun and followed his father and wife. Lydia hugged his arm. Relax, she said. You look like you're expecting an attack. Avery looked at her. Uniformed cops are always targets, you know that, he said. He looked around at his surroundings and noticed the sympathetic glances being thrown his way. Several of Lydia's colleagues shook his hand and thanked him for his service, but he saw it in their eyes, they all knew. After some time, he excused himself and went to the restroom. There he met Robert, who was washing his hands. Avery noticed a large diamond watch on his wrist. It's a beautiful watch, Avery said. Is it new? Robert took it off and handed it to Avery. Yes, he said. It was a gift. Avery examined the watch and turned it over. Merry Christmas with love from your girls, the inscription read. Avery handed the watch back to Robert, noticing his cheeky grin. Not bad, Avery said as he finished washing his hands. He wiped them dry and left the restroom without giving Robert a chance to say anything. He caught up with Lydia and his father, who were talking to someone. I have to go, he said. Something has come up, and I need to deal with it. Lydia turned to kiss him, but he was gone before she could do anything. He didn't look back. At that moment, he didn't care. After his shift, he went to a bar and drank a couple of beers before heading home. Why did she do this? He asked himself. Lydia was already home when he returned, and she was furious. Where have you been? She asked. I finished my shift and stopped in for a couple of beers, he replied. What's the big deal? I'm worried, she said. You are my husband, and I love you. How much did Robert's Rolex cost you? He asked. Lydia's eyes widened. Did you see this? She asked. Yes, I saw it, and I saw that you engraved it for your two girls, he said. Seriously? Jenny is his daughter, he told her. He's her uncle and my brother-in-law, she said. And that's all? Is it true? Avery asked. Please don't insult my intelligence. I saw how everyone in your office was looking at me. I'm not a fool. It's not what you think, she said. Yes, sure. Sorry, I don't believe you, he said. Listen, you asked what I wanted for Christmas. Right now, all I want is your signature. My signature? She asked. On what? On divorce papers, he said. Divorce? She asked. I don't want a divorce. I love you. Of course you do, he said. I know a lot more than you might think, so don't lie to me. I just want to know two things. Which? She asked. Why, and for how long? He said. Lydia's eyes dropped to the floor. It started a few months after I began working at the firm, she said. Are you saying this has been going on for most of our marriage? He asked. She nodded. Sorry, she said. I didn't mean to hurt you. It was just a night, and Robert said you liked it. Don't you remember what I told you about Robert? Avery asked. Did I ever let you know that I would enjoy being a cuckold? Sorry, she said. He was so smart and charming. I did everything so that you wouldn't find out. When did my father get involved? He asked. Lydia's eyes widened. How do you know? She asked. It doesn't matter. How long have you been sleeping with my father? He asked. It started about a year ago, she said. We were very careful. We really didn't want to hurt you. Am I Jenny's father? He asked. Of course you are, she said. I'm sorry if I don't believe you, Avery said. I'll do a DNA test to find out for sure. How dare you? She began before Avery exploded. No, he said. How dare you? You know how much I hated that stupid, but you still went and slept with him and with my father. No! All of this is your fault, and yes, I'm filing for divorce. All these years, I loved only you. I was the one who took care of you when you were sick, and I was the one who took care of Jenny because you were too busy. You were my life, and you stabbed me in the back. Now leave me alone. I'll try not to ruin Jenny's holiday, but you and your idiot better not dare to mess with me. Understood? He gathered a few things and settled into his office. He avoided his wife as much as he could and didn't tell her anything. He spent as much time as possible with his daughter, knowing that he would soon become a part-time father. Ben later contacted him, saying he had a new video. Looks like you really stirred a hornet's nest, Ben said as Avery walked into the office. Ben played the last video as Avery sat down. The video was filmed in his father's office. He knows, Lydia said. Robert and Dan shrugged. So what? Said Robert. It doesn't change anything. He filed for divorce, Lydia said. Have you been handed the papers yet? Dan asked. Lydia shook her head. Not yet, but I expect it to happen soon, she said. Well, I guess we'll just have to educate your husband. Let him know what's what. Either you will comply, or you will be severely punished, Dan said. Be careful, Lydia said. Don't worry, said Robert. He's just a dumb cop, he won't be able to do anything. Avery sat quietly as the video ended. Be very careful, Ben said. I already sent this to Sally and spoke to your boss. He said he would send patrols to monitor the situation. Ben handed him the key to the apartment he had set up for Avery for the time being. Avery thanked him before leaving. On Christmas morning, Lydia asked if he would go to his parents. Yes, I will be there, he said. She leaned in to kiss him, but he waved her away. Save it for your lovers, he said. Please don't ruin Christmas, she said as she and Jenny walked away. You mean even more than you've already ruined? He asked. Go. I'll be there soon. Once he was sure Lydia was gone, he put on his uniform, making sure to wear his body armor. Most of his clothes and personal belongings were already packed and in the car. He called the station to confirm the time he would be at the Wilsons' home and arranged to meet his partner there. Then he called his supervisor to ensure a patrol car would be present. He carefully timed his arrival and met his partner a block away. He got into his car, and they drove up to the house. They got out, and Avery rang the doorbell. His father answered the door, looking shocked to see his son and another man. What does this mean, Avery? He asked. You don't need to call. We're all waiting for you to come. You're welcome. Mr. Wilson, Avery said in his best cop voice, placing his hand on his gun, I'm here on official business. Is Lydia Wilson here? Yes, she is. You know that. Come on in, Dan said. Avery shook his head. Not today, Mr. Wilson. Have Mrs. Wilson come to the door, please. Dan nodded and called for Lydia, who came over with Jenny. The partner turned to her. Mrs. L. Wilson, he asked. She nodded, and he confirmed her identity before handing her an envelope. You have been served with a subpoena. Lydia cried as she opened the envelope. Are you handing me divorce papers for Christmas? She asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. How could you? This is much better than what you and my ex-family had planned for me, Avery said. Jenny began to cry as she watched her mother and looked up at her father. He knelt down and hugged his daughter. What's going on, Dad? She asked. I'm so sorry, honey, but your mother has decided that she doesn't love me anymore, he said, hugging her as she cried. I'll see you as soon as possible, and never forget that I love you, okay? Jenny, crying, turned to her mother and hit her. I hate you, she screamed, then ran away. Dan made his way to the sobbing Lydia. How dare you come here and disrupt our family Christmas, he growled. Mr. Wilson, Consider yourself lucky that I'm not going to arrest you and the rest of your family for conspiracy, Avery said, handing him another envelope that contained photos and videos of their escapades at the Marriott Hotel. He was very careful not to include anything that had been recorded in their offices. By then, Barbara and Robert had already reached the door. "What's happening?" asked Barbara. "Avery just served Lydia with divorce papers," Dan said. "He knows," Barbara said, stepping back, her face pale. "Yes, and I know all about what you four have planned for me," Avery said. "I advise you to study the protection order very carefully and strictly comply with it. I will have no problem arresting you if you violate it." "Order of protection?" Robert shouted. "I'll kick your fifth place right now," he added, extending his hand toward Avery. Dan grabbed Robert's hand as Avery prepared to draw his gun. "Don't touch him, dumbass," Dan shouted. Robert removed his hand. Dan looked at Avery. "Okay, idiot, if that's how you want to play. You could have been part of something great, but you ruined it," he said. "I thought I was part of something great," Avery said. He looked at Lydia. "I'll call you after the holidays and set up a time to pick up the rest of my things. At this time, I advise you to follow the order and stay away from me." "Okay," Avery said. "I'm sorry," she said. "Yes," Avery replied. "Goodbye. Merry damn Christmas." Avery went to the apartment Ben had set up for him and unpacked. Merry damn Christmas indeed. He spent the rest of the day drowning in a bottle of Jack Daniels. The next week, he received a call from his father. "I want to see you in my office this afternoon," Dan ordered. Avery laughed. "People in hell want ice water too," he said. "This will not happen. Have you forgotten about the order of protection? If you want to meet, you can call my lawyer and arrange a meeting in her office in her presence." He ended the call before Dan could say anything else and contacted Sally. She didn't like that he called during her holiday break, but she listened to what he had to say and agreed to meet Dan, Robert, and Lydia in her office. She also agreed to contact Dan and arrange a meeting that afternoon. The five met in a conference room at Sally's office. "Couldn't it have waited until New Year's?" asked Sally. "No, it couldn't," Dan said. "Are you Mrs. Wilson's lawyer?" asked Sally. Dan looked at Robert. "Robert Wilson and I are both her lawyers," he said. "I think you really don't care about things like conflicts of interest, do you?" said Sally. "Well, let's see what the Bar Association has to say about this. What's so important that you had to meet with my client during the holidays?" Dan took a folder out of his briefcase and placed it on the table. "I want Avery to give up this stupid divorce and sign this agreement," he said. Sally read the paper inside and laughed. She handed the paper to Avery, who also read it in disbelief. "Do you really expect my client to give up his rights as a husband and agree to let his wife sleep with you and his brother? Mr. Wilson, you are out of your mind. Rest assured that I will bring this to the attention of the bar. Now get out of my office before I call security." "I will destroy you," Dan said to Avery. "When I'm done with you, you'll wish you were never born." "Do you know that threatening a police officer is against the law?" said Sally. "Get out before I arrest you all." Blushing, Dan, Lydia, and Robert left the office. Avery apologized to Sally and thanked her from the bottom of his heart. "I can't wait to get this idiot in front of a judge," she said as she closed the office door. Avery kept his promise and called Lydia after New Year's to set up a time to pick up the rest of his things. She told him that no one would be at home, and he naively believed her. As soon as he entered the house, he felt something before everything went dark. That was the last thing he remembered before he woke up in the hospital. On May 6, 2019, John's rehabilitation went better than anyone could have imagined. Not only did he regain his memory, but his body also recovered, and he now felt as strong as ever. He noticed that doctors had performed some reconstructive surgery on his face, apparently to deal with scars from the injury. The surgery was minor and left a few small scars, but it was enough to change his appearance significantly. Ben also provided him with special contact lenses designed to change the color of his eyes. According to Ben, his daughter had a habit of visiting her father's grave at least once a week, usually on Tuesday mornings on the way to school. John wanted to meet Jenny face to face, and they decided it would be best if he could change his eye color when they finally met. They also agreed on a revenge plan that would take effect once John was released from rehab. Fortunately, that day had come. Ben arrived at the rehab center as John was receiving his final instructions. He gathered his things and headed to his friend's car. On the way to the apartment Ben had arranged for him, they discussed a plan of action and agreed not to execute it until John met with Jenny. Once they arrived at the complex, Ben helped his friend carry his things upstairs. John looked around the one-room apartment. He was impressed by the furniture Ben had chosen for him, especially the huge flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. After showing him the apartment, Ben handed him the keys to the apartment, the keys to the new SUV, and new bank cards. John had become more comfortable with modern technology during his rehab, learning to use a smartphone and the latest version of Windows. He was now able to start using the new computer Ben had installed in the living room. After John thanked his friend, he settled in for the rest of the day. Later, he took the SUV out to get used to driving. He knew he would have to get accustomed to driving in Southern California again, and he wasn't happy about it. He went into a store and bought a bottle of Jack Daniels and a pack of cigarettes. He hadn't smoked since he joined the police force, but he felt an old urge and decided that since he was already technically dead, it didn't matter. He returned home and relaxed all day, watching TV. After unwinding with a glass of Jack Daniels and a cigarette, he went to bed. The next day, he woke up early, showered, got dressed, and went to the cemetery, hoping to arrive there before Jenny. He found the grave and sat down, sipping a cup of coffee he had bought along the way. Soon, he noticed her walking along the path. He threw the nearly empty cup into the trash and stood up. She stopped at the grave, apparently saying something. When he approached her, she looked at him before speaking. "Did you know my father?" she asked. He nodded before answering, "Yes, actually. I knew him. We served in the army together." "John," he said, extending his hand. "Smith. John Smith." Jenny took his hand and looked at him carefully. "Jenny Wilson. Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith." John smiled. "Please, call me John." She smiled before turning back to the grave. "He was a hero, you know," she said. "He also served in the police force." Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke. "You really miss your father, don't you?" he asked. She nodded. "I haven't seen him since I was 8 years old," she said. "I miss him so much. I love coming here early in the morning and saying hi to him. My mother would kill me if she found out." "Is it true?" asked John. "Yes," she said. "She married my uncle after my father was killed. My father had just filed for divorce. He was killed shortly after that." "Do you know how this happened?" asked John. "They say he was shot by a robber," she said. "I take it you don't believe it," John said. She shook her head. "My father was the best cop. I don't believe he could have been caught off guard," she said. "But I can't prove otherwise." "What do you think happened?" asked John. "I don't know," she said. "I just can't believe a robber would take him by surprise." John nodded. "These things happen, you know," he said. "Yes, but not with my father," Jenny said. "So, if you don't mind me asking, have you decided what you want to do with your life?" asked John. "It's not difficult for me to answer, John," she said. "I plan to attend UCLA this fall. I want to become a lawyer, but not like my mother or uncle. I want to be a prosecutor. I want to put bad guys behind bars. I think I owe that to my father." "Your father would be very proud of you," John said, tears welling up in his eyes. He wanted to hug this girl and tell her that everything would be fine and that he was proud of her. She looked at him for a moment before speaking. "I have to go, John. Do you mind if we stay in touch? I don't know why, but I feel safe next to you, even though we just met. Something about you reminds me of my father," she said. John smiled. "Of course, Jenny. Can I give you my number? Call me anytime you need," he said. "Of course," she said, smiling. "I hope you don't mind if I call at weird hours." He shook his head. "Not at all, Jenny. Call me anytime you want." They exchanged numbers, and Jenny left. He walked toward his SUV and didn't notice Jenny putting his discarded coffee cup in a plastic bag. He also did not see her write down his license plate number. John left the cemetery and headed toward the Griffith Park Observatory. It's time to put the plan into action. When he got there, he looked at the city, the place where he once served as a policeman. He pulled out 2 phones with disposable SIM cards that Ben had bought. He activated the first phone, set the number to private, and connected the voice changer Ben had given him. He selected the desired effect and dialed the number. The woman answered on the second ring. "Lydia Wilson," she said sharply. "Why? Why did you kill me?" he asked before hanging up. He quickly turned off the phone and took out the battery. Unknown to him, Lydia had just left a meeting with her husband's sponsors when the call came. She heard the message and tried to answer, but the call had already ended. She thought it was the voice of her late husband, Avery, but she wasn't sure. Of course, Avery couldn't call her from beyond the grave, she told herself. She considered calling back until she realized that the incoming number was set to private. She knew that her current husband had enemies and wondered if the call could have come from one of them. Meanwhile, John activated the second phone. This time, he used it to send a text message to Robert's phone with a photo attached. The caption read, "Remember my promise," and the photo was of Robert, recently taken outside his office, with a crosshair on him. After confirming that the message had been sent, he turned off the phone and took out the battery. Both phones were later smashed, and their remains were thrown into various trash bins around the city. Robert, of course, saw the photo and read the caption. He realized it referred to the promise Avery had made to him on their wedding day all those years ago. But that was impossible, he thought. Avery had been dead for 10 years, and no one except Lydia knew what his little brother had told him. There was a tense atmosphere in the Wilson household that night. Robert and Lydia shared their experiences with each other, but chalked it all up to a political enemy and thought no more about it. John followed the plan he and Ben had agreed upon and waited 3 days before making a second round of calls. This time, he traveled to neighboring Orange County before sending a screenshot of the video showing Robert shooting him to Lydia. The caption to the message read, "Your sins will catch up with you." The call to Robert's phone was also different. This time, he whispered, "Remember, I can shoot at 1,000 yards," before hanging up. As before, he destroyed both phones and threw the pieces into separate trash cans before returning home. Robert and Lydia became increasingly nervous. No one but them and Avery knew about the events in that bedroom 10 years ago, and Avery was dead. How could this happen, they asked each other. Following the plan, John and Ben did not send any calls or messages for another couple of days. John knew that Ben was busy gathering information about Robert, so he spent his free time studying the events of the last 10 years. Then he received a call. Opening his smartphone, he saw that it was Jenny calling. "John Smith," he replied. "Hi, John. This is Jenny. Do you remember me?" He smiled. He could never forget his little girl. "Of course. What can I do for you?" "Can we meet tomorrow morning at my father's grave around 6?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "I'll be there. Everything is fine. I need to talk to someone very urgently," she said. "Okay, I'll see you there in the morning," he said. "Thank you," she said before hanging up. He wondered what she needed to talk about. The next day, he sat on a bench near the grave and waited for Jenny. She arrived exactly at the appointed time and sat next to him. "Good morning," he said. She returned the greeting, and he noticed that she was very nervous. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She looked at the grave and then back at him. She opened her purse, took out an envelope, and handed it to him. "What is this?" he asked. "You know, I remember the last time I saw my father alive," she said. "After the funeral, my mother married my Uncle Robert, and he insisted that I call him Dad. I refused, although it angered my mother. He kept saying that he was my father, but I didn't believe him. Now I have the truth, he is not my real father." She looked into his eyes. "You are my father." John was stunned. How could she know? He thought. She pointed to the envelope. "Sorry for the interruption, but after we met, I took your coffee cup and cigarette butt from the trash can. You know, smoking kills," she said. He laughed. "Something about you reminded me of that day 10 years ago. You can't change your DNA. They were able to take enough saliva from what I found to identify you as my father with 99.9% certainty." "Wow," John said. "Ben was right about you. You really are resourceful. You will make a great prosecutor." Jenny smiled. "So who are you really, and who then is buried in my father's grave if it is not you?" "The man you knew as Avery Wilson died 10 years ago," he said. "My name is really John Smith, thanks to the federal authorities. The official story is that Avery was killed during a home robbery, but that's not true, is it?" she asked. He shook his head. "No," he said. "Not at all. I knew it." "I need the truth, Dad," she said. He enjoyed hearing her call him Dad and knew she was right, but he wasn't sure if she could handle the whole truth. "Are you sure you want to know?" he asked. "It's much worse than you can imagine." He saw tears in her eyes. Yes, I need to know," she said, "no matter how hard it is." "It looks like things are not going well in the Wilson household right now," John said. Jenny shook her head. "No," she said. Mom and Robert have been on edge the last few days. As far as I can understand, they are receiving strange calls and messages, and it is very stressful for them. But that's not all, is it? John asked. Tears flowed down her cheeks, although she tried to hold them back. Did they hurt you? She burst into tears, and John hugged her. It felt so good to hold his little girl again, and he wanted to ease her pain. You'll probably hate me if I tell you, she said. John shook his head. I could never hate you, he said. You are my little princess, and you always will be. She was pleased to hear this and gathered as much strength as she could before continuing. Robert hurt me, she said quietly. John felt furious as she spoke. What are your plans for today? He asked. None, actually. School is over, but I can't stay at home anymore, she said. Right now, I'm just waiting for graduation so I can move out and go to college. You said you wanted to see proof. Do you want to come to my house so I can show you? Her eyes lit up. Is it true? She asked. Yes, I would really like to, John replied. He took out his phone and called Ben. Hey, John, what's wrong? Asked Ben. Ben, I need you to come to me right now. Plans have changed, John said. Ben knew not to ask too many questions. Okay, he said. I'll be there soon. John ended the call and walked Jenny to her car. Follow me, he said. I'm in that SUV, he added, pointing to his car. He drove to his apartment, making sure that Jenny followed him the entire time. He walked her to his apartment and invited her inside. It's not as nice as your house, but it's home, he said. This is great, Dad, Jenny said, looking around. A woman's hand is missing here. She agreed to coffee, so he turned on his Keurig machine and let her choose a flavor. After they received their coffee, they sat down at the table. So where's this evidence? She asked. Are you really sure you want to see this? He asked. It's a pretty brutal video. I told you I needed to see this, she said. John opened the laptop and played a video of Dan, Robert, and Lydia planning to shoot him, then showed her the video of the shooting itself. Her face turned pale and tears streamed down her cheeks. Oh my God, she said when the video ended. I can't believe they were actually planning to kill you. By that time, there was a knock on the door. John opened it and let Ben in, introducing him to Jenny. So what's going on? Ben asked as he sat down. Jenny found out who I really was, John said, and she told me that Robert was rude to her. I can't just sit and watch this. Ben nodded. I understand, he said. So you think it's time to speed things up? Yes, I think so, John said. Ben thought for a moment before speaking. He looked at Jenny before continuing. Could you help us? Oh yes, I'm ready to do whatever I can, she said. Ben looked at John. We could use someone to keep an eye on everything at the Wilson house, he said. Maybe she could set up cameras and give us eyes in their house. I don't want her to be in danger, John said. No, she won't, Ben said. Are you willing to do this, Jenny? John asked. Jenny nodded. Of course, she said. I'm already an adult, and I want to help. And you can't stop me, Dad, she added, emphasizing the word dad. John felt proud of his daughter. She was definitely his girl. Okay, Ben said. I'll give you the equipment and show you how to use it. He looked at John. Maybe it's time to turn to the media. I'll arrange an interview and contact you. Is there anyone we can trust in the DA's office? Asked John. Ben shook his head. A lot has changed in the last 10 years, John. As much as I would like for all three of them to pay, the fact is that they will drag this out in the courts for years, and there is no guarantee that anything will be done at all. Sorry, but this is the reality. So it's all up to us, John said. Maybe we can get people on the East Coast, Ben said. You know they don't really like publicity. John understood what this meant. He hated the idea, but he knew this might be their best chance. Okay, John said. Arrange an interview. I'll keep doing what I've been doing. Maybe we can get them to act. He looked at Jenny. You install the cameras like Ben said, and don't take any chances. If you feel in danger, call me and Ben immediately. If necessary, you can stay here. Any questions? Jenny and Ben shook their heads. Okay, let's go. They walked out, and John hugged his daughter tightly. I'm so proud of you, Jenny, he said, fighting back tears. Jenny smiled and kissed her father on the cheek. I love you, Daddy, she said. I love you too, princess, he replied. The next few days passed in a blur. John continued his campaign of calls and messages, driving Lydia and Robert even more desperate. Jenny followed Ben's instructions and installed cameras and microphones throughout the house. Even the home phones were connected. Robert and Lydia couldn't even go to the toilet without Ben and John finding out. As a result, John, Ben, and Jenny gathered even more evidence against Robert and Lydia, including telephone conversations with suspicious shadowy figures supporting Robert's campaign. Ben collected and analyzed all the videos and phone calls, sifting out the mundane information from the important. Ben also met with a journalist he knew and trusted from the Los Angeles Times, and she contacted John. "John Smith," he said when his phone rang. "Mr. Smith, this is Elizabeth Johnson from the Times. I talked to your friend, and he said you have a story for me. Can we talk soon?" "Of course," John said. "I also have a video if you're interested." "Yes, I'm very interested," she said. "Can you come over this afternoon?" "Yes, I can be there this afternoon." "At what time?" asked John. They agreed to meet in the conference room at the newspaper's office at 1400 hours, after which they ended the conversation. John looked at his watch. He had a little over an hour to get there. So he packed his things and hit the road. He finally found a parking spot and headed to the conference room, where he met Elizabeth. She was about the same age as him and had short blonde hair. She looked good even in professional clothes. John naturally looked at her fingers and saw neither a wedding ring nor an engagement ring. He extended his hand to her. "Miss Johnson," he asked. She smiled and shook his hand. "Please, call me Liz," she said. "Come on in, sit down. Can I offer you something? Coffee? Tea? Latte?" "Coffee is always welcome," he said with a smile. Liz pressed a button on the intercom and ordered 2 cups of coffee. "Ben Jacobs told me you have a story about Robert Wilson, and from what he said, it's quite interesting," she said. John nodded. "Liz, how much do you know about the death of his brother, Avery?" he asked. "As I recall, the official story is that he was killed during a home robbery," she said. "Are you saying that this is not true?" "Let me show you some videos, and you can decide for yourself," he said. "Then, if you are interested, I will tell you my story. And I warn you, these videos are pretty violent. Are you okay with this?" "Of course," she said, and John booted up his laptop. He opened the desired folder and showed her a video of Robert, Dan, and Lydia planning his murder, and then a video of the assassination attempt itself. After they finished, Liz sat in her chair, shocked. "Well, what do you think?" asked John. "Are you interested in this?" "Absolutely, I'm interested," she said. "How did you get these videos?" "I'll explain, but first I want to know what part of this is on the record," asked John. "If there's anything you want off the record, just tell me." Liz thought for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Ben says you can be trusted, and that's enough for me. This part is definitely off the record. Avery Wilson officially died 10 years ago. John Smith, that's me, spent 10 years in a coma as a result of that attack. I was Avery Wilson. The FBI organized a new identity and intended to place Avery in witness protection, but for some reason, their business stalled and nothing worked out. But Avery remains dead to the world. Do you understand me?" "Yes," Liz said. "You understand that I will have to check all this before publishing anything. I'll definitely have to do some analysis on these videos." "I understand," John said. "If you look at the public records, you will see that Avery, that is me, filed for divorce in December 2008, and the papers were served on Christmas Day. The attack occurred shortly after New Year's Day. You should also find the agreement proposed by Robert and his father, who represented Lydia as her lawyer." He continued to tell Liz's story, stopping only when he got to the part he wanted to leave off the record. "Let me show you something else," John said, pulling out the DNA test Jenny had done for him. He showed it to Liz, and she realized that he was showing her this document. "Oh God," she said. "You really are Avery Wilson, or were. Look, there's much more to this story. Do you want to discuss this over dinner?" asked John. Liz smiled. "Perhaps," she said. "Let me think, and I'll call you." "Okay, sounds good, Liz," he said. "I look forward to your call." They said goodbye, and John went home. The next day, Liz called him. "Mr. Smith," she said, "I hope this isn't too short notice, but I'd like to take you up on your offer for dinner." "Of course," John said. "Where would you like to go?" Well, there is one political event, a meeting with the candidates, including Robert, she said. I'll even get to ask a few questions. Are you still interested in this? Sounds interesting, John said. Sure, give me the details, and I'll pick you up. After Liz gave him all the information he needed, he called Ben to let him know. Are you crazy? Asked Ben. Everything will be fine, John said. I'm dead, remember? Just be careful and let Liz ask the questions. Got it, said Ben. Yes, I got it, John said. John called his daughter to warn her that he would be there with Liz. Thank you for letting me know, she said. I'll be there too, of course, so I'll act like we've never met. Thank you, John replied. Later, he put on his best suit and picked Liz up at her apartment. She looked dazzling in her evening dress. You look amazing, he said when she opened the door. She smiled. Thank you, sir, and you look quite elegant too, she replied. They arrived at the event and mingled with the crowd before heading to dinner. Liz handed her invitation, which included her and one attendant, to the man at the door, who waved them through. Robert, Lydia, and Jenny stood close to the entrance, shaking hands with everyone who entered. John held his breath, hoping that neither Lydia nor Robert would recognize him. Robert held out his hand to Liz as she approached him. Good evening, Miss Johnson, he said, taking her hand. Glad to see you. And I see you've brought a friend, he added, holding out his hand to John. John thought he would lose his composure, but he pulled himself together and shook Robert's hand. What's your name? Asked Robert. Smith. John Smith, John replied. He glanced down and noticed that Robert was wearing the same Rolex watch that Lydia had given him for that fateful Christmas holiday. Nice to meet you, Mr. Smith. This is my wife, Lydia, and my daughter, Jenny, Robert added. John nodded to Lydia and Jenny. Jenny smiled politely, while Lydia looked at him with a strange expression. John thought she didn't look well. Wrinkles appeared around her eyes and mouth, and she looked tired and thin, too thin, he thought. John wondered if perhaps she recognized him but dismissed the thought. Mrs. Wilson, Miss Wilson, he said casually before moving on. John and Liz walked to their seats and sat down, introducing themselves to the other guests at the table. He leaned toward Liz. This watch he's wearing is the same one that Lydia gave him 10 years ago, he whispered. Oh really? She asked. Interesting. The dinner went well, as far as a rubber chicken political event could go. John swallowed his food with difficulty and carried on light conversation with the others at the table. From time to time, he glanced at Robert and noticed that Jenny was watching him. It seemed to him that she even showed him a glance. He smiled and went back to his dinner. Finally, the dinner ended, and the host introduced the candidates on stage. Robert was the first to address the public. After he gave his standard speech about the need to bring responsibility back to Sacramento, the room was open to questions from reporters. Liz raised her hand and was chosen first. She stood up and introduced herself. Elizabeth Johnson, Los Angeles Times, she said. This is your first time in the political arena, and we don't know much about you, Mr. Wilson. Could you tell us how close you were with your brother, Officer Avery Wilson? Thank you for asking, Miss Johnson, he said. My brother and I were very close. We've always been like this. His death was a heavy blow for all of us. I see, Liz said. And you married your brother's widow shortly after his funeral 10 years ago, correct? That's true, he replied. So why did your brother list you and your father on his divorce papers from his wife, which, by the way, was filed less than a month before he was killed? Liz asked. There were audible exclamations in the hall. That was 10 years ago, Miss Johnson, Robert said. My brother suffered from some form of paranoia, possibly as a result of his time in the army. I don't know why he did this, but the divorce papers contained a proposal from you and your father that deprived Officer Wilson of his rights as a husband. Liz said, Can you explain this? And is it normal for two senior lawyers at a firm to handle something as simple as a divorce? I don't remember such a proposal, Robert replied nervously. In terms of representing Lydia, we did so as a sign of gratitude for her many years of faithful service to us. He looked around the hall. Next question, he shouted before Liz could ask another question. He pointed to a man 2 tables away from Liz. Brad Williams, Orange County Register, he said. Can you answer Miss Johnson's question? Were you having an affair with your brother's wife at the time of his murder? Cheers rang out again in the hall. John noticed Lydia looking down at her plate when the question was asked. This is an outrageous accusation, Robert said. I love my brother very much. No one was more saddened by his death than I was. At the time of the murder, your company was under investigation by federal authorities for suspected links to organized crime. Can you tell us how this investigation turned out? Brad asked. We were completely cleared, and the case was closed, Robert said. Next question. He pointed to another woman a few tables away. Jane Holliday, Lean News, she said. As far as I remember, the FBI never completely closed the case. They simply stated that they had not found any convincing evidence to support the allegations. Is this correct? The result is the same for us, Robert said. If there had been any truth to the allegations, my father would never have gotten a seat in court. John noticed that Robert was clearly nervous. The presenter walked over and ended the question and answer session before introducing the next candidate. I don't think he helped himself, John whispered to Liz. She smiled and nodded her head. I think you're right, she said. You might want to watch the evening news when you get home. A couple of hours later, the event ended, and everyone began to leave. Robert, Lydia, and Jenny quickly headed for the exit but were intercepted by John and Liz. Mr. Wilson, John said, holding out his hand. Robert stopped and shook it. I couldn't help but notice your watch. This is a wonderful thing. Can I take a closer look at it? Robert took off his watch and handed it to John. John examined it and turned it over, showing Liz the writing on the back, which was exactly as he had described to her the day before. He returned the watch to Robert. I knew someone who had a very similar watch, John said as he looked at Lydia. You must love your husband very much to give him such a thing. Lydia smiled. Yes, I do. Mr. She began. Smith, John said. It was nice to meet you. I hope you have a pleasant evening. He nodded to Jenny, who smiled. Robert hugged Lydia, and the three quickly left. John and Liz watched them go. Looks like you just found your story, John said. Liz nodded. I think so, she replied. Now that this is over, would you like to go somewhere? Maybe we should have a real dinner. She smiled. I'd love to, John, but I have to get home and finish the article before it appears in the morning paper. I understand, John replied. Liz turned to John as he stopped in front of her apartment complex. John, I want you to know that I checked your old police records. I didn't want to interfere, but I needed to understand what kind of person you were or what you were like. According to your record, you were a cop who did not tolerate any disrespect, she said. But tonight, I saw something different. She continued, I was very impressed with how you held back. It must have been tough seeing your wife and daughter with the man who shot you. No, it wasn't easy, John admitted. I hope to improve my relationship with my daughter. Liz nodded. I understand. She is very beautiful and very similar to you. Look, if you don't mind, I'd like to make it up to you somehow. How do you feel about country and western? She asked. I love it, John replied. Great, she said, smiling. I know one place where you can take me in a week on Friday, if of course you don't mind. They serve cold beer and the best burgers in town, and there's line dancing. You have jeans and cowboy boots, right? I think by then I'll have found something suitable, he said. If you don't mind teaching me these line dances, I've been asleep for the last 10 years. Will you pick me up at, say, 6:30? She asked. John smiled. Agreed, he replied. He got out of the car, opened the door for Liz, and walked her to her apartment. She opened the door, then turned and kissed him tenderly on the cheek. See you in a week, cowboy, she said before walking inside. Sweet dreams, she added as she closed the door. John felt like a schoolboy who had just asked a girl out on his first date. He was practically jumping and skipping on the way back to the car, smiling. He arrived home and immediately turned on the evening news. It didn't take long before local news channels began showing clips of the evening's event. Several candidates for public office met with the press this evening to introduce themselves, the news anchor said. Attorney Robert Wilson faced harsh questions about his relationship with his brother, fallen police officer Avery Wilson, and the officer's widow, who is now his wife. The screen showed a very nervous and agitated Robert who dodged questions. John smiled. This evening clearly did not go well for Robert. At one point, Wilson was asked whether he was having an affair with his brother's wife, who received divorce papers less than a month before the tragic murder. The host added that Wilson denied the allegation, saying he loved his brother. When the report ended, his phone rang. Looking at the screen, he saw that Jenny was calling. Hello, Princess, he said when he answered the phone. Hi, Dad, she replied. Who was that hottie you were with tonight? Her name is Liz. She's a journalist. I assume you approve? Asked John. Definitely, Jenny replied. Well, I have a real date with her in a week on Friday, John said. Well done, Dad, Jenny said. By the way, Mom and Robert are just beside themselves right now. They are furious about the questions they asked him. They were talking to reporters by phone all this time. I don't know what you did, but you clearly pissed him off. John laughed. Yeah, he clearly wasn't enjoying the evening. I'm just glad I was able to be so close to them and not be recognized. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Jenny replied. Listen, I have to go, but I'll contact you. Love you. I love you too, Princess, he said. Be careful. They finished the call, but John's phone rang again. This time, it was Ben. Hey, buddy, Ben said. I saw Robert on the evening news. He looked very unwell. Liz really pushed him to the wall. Yes, she did, said John. I think your idea to go to the media was a good one. What news do you have? We have some interesting video from their home, and we have recorded some calls with reporters, Ben said. There was another call from your father, and he was clearly unhappy with the way Robert handled the situation. No wonder, John said. Jenny says they're absolutely mad. Well, I have something coming up here, so I'll get back to you later, Ben said. It seems like his performance caught the attention of his sponsors, if you know what I mean. John understood exactly what Ben meant, and he knew it wouldn't bode well for Robert. John spent the rest of the week doing what he had done before, sending little notes and making calls to harass Robert and Lydia, hoping to push them over the edge. He also spent some time shopping for new jeans and cowboy boots for his date with Liz. One day, Jenny had time and went with him. It looks like someone is going to hit the jackpot, she told her father as he tried on new boots. John laughed. Do you really think Liz would like an old man like me? He asked her. Old man? Well, no, said Jenny. You're in great shape, and you look damn good. If she doesn't fall in love with you, she'll be crazy. You are a real treasure. I'm glad you think so, Princess, he said. How are you holding up? I'm fine, she replied. Mom and Robert don't get along at all. All they do is fight and fight. I think we need to step up our game a little. John said, I'll talk to Ben and Liz and see what they think. Jenny nodded. You may be right, Dad, she said. They are clearly afraid of something. After Jenny went home, Liz called him. Hi, John, she said when he answered. I just wanted to let you know that our technical experts have analyzed the video you gave me, and they say both are genuine. I showed them to my editor, and he's interested in seeing what else I can dig up. Do you have any more videos and information to share with me? Yes, there is, John said. Do you want to meet for lunch or something? There's one more aspect that I didn't tell you about, and it's very delicate. Yes, of course, Liz replied. Can we meet in an hour? I'll send you the address. Great, John said. I just need to run home and grab my laptop. Okay, Liz replied. See you then. Having received the address, John headed home, took his laptop, and went to meet Liz. She chose a nice bistro with outdoor seating, and John noticed her immediately. She smiled as he sat down opposite her. It's good to see you again, he said. Mutually, cowboy, she replied. What do you have for me? First of all, this concerns Jenny, my daughter, he began. By the way, she knows who I am, and we spent some time getting to know each other again. She is a very wonderful girl. It's good that you two are getting acquainted again, Liz said. What's wrong with her? She told me that Robert was verbally abusive and hit her, he said. Liz looked at him in shock. Oh God, she said. Did she call the police or do something? Yes, she says she called the police twice, but her mother was able to get her out of the situation, he replied. According to Jenny, they threatened her if she called the police again. We need to get her out of there, Liz said. John nodded. I know, but she's an adult, John explained. She is going to UCLA in the fall and plans to stay there. Now she is just waiting for the right moment to leave home. We installed hidden cameras and microphones in their house and will detect if anything happens, but I'm confused. On the one hand, I want to take her now, but if I do this, I will be putting her and myself in even greater danger. These people are playing for keeps, and it doesn't cost them anything to kill both her and me. I have a second bedroom, Liz said. She can move in with me if she wants. Would you like me to talk to her? Do you mind? Asked John. I think she needs to talk to another woman who can understand her point of view. Liz nodded. I would love to talk to her. Can you arrange a meeting? The sooner, the better, Liz said. John nodded and took out his phone. How about right now, if possible? He asked. That would be great, she replied. John called his daughter, and she answered on the second ring. Hi, Dad, she said. Hello, Princess. Can you meet me and Liz right now? He asked. Wow, she said in surprise. Where are you? John gave her the address. Yeah, I'm not that far, she said. I just finished my self-defense class and can be there in 15 minutes. Okay, we'll be waiting for you, John said. We'll sit outside in the back. After finishing the call, he looked at Liz. She could be here in 15 minutes. Will this work? He asked. Of course, Liz replied. It will be nice to have another woman in my house. John was surprised. Yes, he replied. After the divorce, my daughter lived with me. My ex couldn't resist, and I caught him cheating too often. He left, but she stayed. Then she was hit by a drunk driver when she was only 16 years old. I'm sorry, John said. I didn't know you had children. Yes, I was, Liz replied. So I know how you feel right now. John nodded. I've thought about it a couple of times, he said. Well, don't do anything stupid, she told him. Your daughter needs her daddy, and I have to admit that I like you a little too, she smiled. What, me? He was surprised. I'm old, he said. She shook her head. Not at all, she said. I think you're only a couple or 3 years older than me. It can't be, he said. I'm 47. You're no older than 35, right? She smiled. Thanks for the compliment, she replied. Actually, I'm 44, but don't tell anyone about it, okay? Your secret is safe with me, he told her. Remember, John Smith, you may be able to rip Robert's head off, and God knows you have every right to do so, but there's an old saying, you shouldn't argue with someone who buys ink by the barrel, she said. Do what you have to do, but don't cross the line. Thanks for the reminder, he said. By the way, did you bring another video? She asked. Yes, I brought it, he replied, taking out his laptop. This is all pretty tough stuff. I'll warn you right away. He copied the files onto a flash drive and handed it to Liz. Use what you see fit. She took it. Thank you, she said. At that moment, Jenny approached their table. John stood up and motioned for her to sit down. He introduced the girls to each other. I saw you at dinner the other day, Jenny said. I like the way you pinned Robert. Thank you, Liz replied. Then she turned to John. Would you like to take a walk, Dad, so Jenny and I can have some lady time? John raised his hands and stood up. I'll leave you, he said. He kissed Jenny on the cheek and looked at Liz. Thank you, he said. Give us about 30 minutes, okay? Liz asked. Got it, he said. I'll be back in half an hour. John left and started window shopping before returning to the bistro half an hour later and rejoining the girls. They laughed and joked like old friends. The vengeful warrior is back, Liz said with a smile. Okay, Dad, here's the thing. Jenny is coming to see me this evening and will stay at least until she starts her studies at UCLA. She can stay as long as she wants, but there is one condition. I'll pay her expenses, John said. I don't expect you to support her. That would be wrong. Liz shook her head. Thank you, I appreciate it, but that's not what I'm talking about. Starting tomorrow, we both expect you to come to dinner with us as often as possible, preferably every evening, if you can, she said, and both women smiled as they looked at him. Okay, he agreed. Actually, these are 2 conditions, but I accept. Jenny hugged John, and Liz smiled. Thank you, Dad, she said. I love you so much. I love you too, Princess, John said, holding back tears as she sat back down. Liz held out her hand. Give me your phone for a minute, Jenny, she said. I want to make sure any tracking functionality is disabled. Jenny handed Liz the phone, and John watched as the older woman's fingers moved quickly across the screen. She soon returned the phone to Jenny. Oh, I turned off GPS and deleted the phone finder app. I didn't notice anything else. I also added my number so you can call me if you need it, she said. What will you tell Mom? Asked John. Nothing special, Jenny replied. I'll just say that I'll be staying with a friend for a while. I'm already an adult, so there's nothing she can do to stop me. She looked at Liz and her father, wondering what life would be like with them. Thank you both for everything, she said. She looked at Liz. I'll see you tonight, okay? Liz nodded. See you later, she replied. Did you take the key I gave you? Here it is, Jenny said, showing the key before walking away. See you. You have no idea how much this means to me, John said after Jenny left, especially since we only just met. Liz took his hand. My gut instincts usually lead me right, John, she said. And now my instinct tells me to trust you. You've been hurt badly, and part of me wants to help you. Who knows what will come of it? John nodded in understanding. But remember what I told you before, do what you think is right with Robert and Lydia, but don't cross the line. I understand, he replied. Liz squeezed his hand tightly and looked at him seriously. Promise me, she said. I promise, John answered her. She nodded. I will keep your word. Well, I have to go. I need to get ready for the arrival of my new neighbor, she said. I'll also try to find information about those 911 calls. If Jenny called, there should be a recording. I'll let you know what I find. Okay, sounds great, Liz, John said. After Liz left, John received a call from Ben. What's new, Ben? He asked, answering the call. Do you have a minute? Asked Ben. John answered in the affirmative. I need you to come in and check something out. It was a very interesting call. I'll be right there, John said, hanging up. He left quickly after paying the bill and headed to Ben's office. Right from the doorway, he went to Ben's office. Ben looked up from his computer. John, I want you to hear this, he said, turning the laptop towards him. John sat up and looked at the screen, then played the video along with the synchronized audio. The video showed Robert in his office answering a phone call. Wilson, he said. Bobby, exclaimed the person on the other end of the line. Tony, Robert replied. Haven't heard from you for a long time. How are you, buddy? Bobby, what is this nonsense I'm reading about your campaign, said the man with a distinct New York accent. I don't know what you're talking about, Tony, Robert said. Sometimes reporters suddenly pull out some old dirt. I thought we dealt with your brother's case a long time ago. I thought so too, Robert replied. Listen, Bobby, Mario is not happy right now. You know how he feels about unfinished business, right? You need to get this under control, Tony said. We have a lot of money invested in your campaign, and we can't let you ruin it. I understand, Tony, Robert replied. Maybe I should deal with that Times reporter. What, are you going to fire some reporter for doing her job? Asked Tony. Are you crazy? You know every blogger is already writing about this. Are you going to kill all the bloggers on the planet? Are you stupid? Look, Tony, tell Mario that I'm going to meet with this journalist and try to work things out, okay? The newspapers write what they want, you know, said Robert. I'll tell him, but you better keep it under control. Got it? Tony warned. You know how much Mario believes in thoroughness. Do you understand me? I'll handle it, Tony. No problem, Robert said, clearly nervous. Make sure it does, Bobby, Tony warned him, because next time there won't be a call. Understood. Got it, Tony. I'll deal with it, Robert replied. The call ended, and Robert's face turned white. He leaned back and took a sip before the video ended. Ben looked at John. Well, it seems like his supporters on the East Coast aren't very happy right now, John said. Robert looked like he was going to pass out. It's worse than you think, Ben replied. I think the man Tony called Mario is none other than Mario D. Silva, one of, if not the most feared crime bosses in the country. I heard that he is trying to push his people into elections all over the country to help him with his various projects, which are really just a front for their criminal activities. Do you think maybe we should let them deal with Robert? John asked. I think if we carefully throw enough information at reporters to get them interested in Robert's background, they can look into it themselves, he said. This D. Silva is a crime lord of the highest order but is generally considered a very loyal man, devoted to his family. D. Silva was the one the FBI was looking at when I was shot, right? Asked John. Why not give it to the FBI? Yes, it was him, Ben replied. Honestly, I'm not sure the FBI is capable of finding its own asses right now. The way they screwed this up 9 or 10 years ago doesn't fill me with confidence. I wouldn't be surprised if D. Silva had some of his people in the FBI at that time. Why don't we dive into all the old videos and see if there are any mentions of Mario or his associates? John suggested. I think you're right, Ben agreed. If they really had connections with D. Silva, they probably talked about it. Damn it, they were openly discussing killing you. Let's get on with it. Okay, of course, John agreed. By the way, how are things going with Liz? Asked Ben. They're going well, John replied. We have a date soon, and Jenny will be staying with her at least until she starts her studies at UCLA. Ben smiled. Okay, he said. Liz is a good woman. She will take care of you, just don't screw her up. Why didn't you court Liz yourself? I'd love to, but consanguinity is a criminal offense in California, Ben replied. She's my sister. The guy she was married to was a walking disaster who couldn't help himself. She had to go through real hell after her daughter died. Take care of her, do you hear? John smiled. You can count on it, friend, he said. John left and headed home, confident that things were finally starting to look in his favor. The next day, he went to Liz's apartment for dinner, looking forward to an evening with the girls. Jenny opened the door when he knocked, wearing shorts and a t-shirt. Liz looked great too and was also wearing denim shorts. John noticed her slender legs and felt a familiar excitement. Well, have a seat, Liz said, putting delicious lasagna on the plates. John's mouth watered as he smelled the food in front of him. Liz insisted that they pray before dinner and asked John to lead the prayer, which he did. For the first time in 10 years, he felt at home. John ate 2 portions of lasagna and extra green beans that Liz made. The girls smiled as they watched him eat. It was the first home-cooked dinner he had eaten in 10 years, and he enjoyed every bite. Finally, having had his fill, he leaned back in his chair and looked at Liz. It was the best lasagna I've ever eaten, he said. Thank you so much, Liz. You're welcome, cowboy, she replied. Glad you liked it. I think we even have some left for tomorrow, if you're interested. Of course I'm interested, he said. He turned to Jenny. Have you heard anything from your mom or Robert? He asked. Yes, my mother called me earlier and wanted to know where I would live. I just said I'd be staying with a friend. She said she wasn't particularly happy about it, but I told her I was an adult and I could live wherever I wanted. I think she won't bother me anymore. John nodded. Fine. What news do you have, Liz? He asked. Oh, by the way, I did some digging and was able to get records of the 911 calls that Jenny made, she said. I listened to them and watched the recordings of the police visits. Jenny was right. Somehow Lydia and Robert were able to convince them that nothing had happened. She looked at Jenny, who was clearly nervous about the topic of conversation. I think Jenny and I will need to discuss this more later this evening. Do you mind, Jenny? She asked. Yes, I think I can handle it, she replied. Great, Liz said. What do you have? She asked, looking at John. Well, we got some interesting audio of a call between Robert and some gangster henchmen from the east. We assume that Mario D. Silva is behind Robert's campaign, and he's clearly not happy with the way things are going, John said. Isn't D. Silva the man the FBI suspects of having ties to your father? Liz asked. I think so, John replied. Ben and I are in the process of reviewing all the videos. We have to find any mention of D. Silva or his entourage. I've spent most of the day looking through them but haven't found anything yet. You know there are programs for that, right? Liz asked. John shook his head. No, I didn't know. Remember, I've been out of the game for a while. Do you have something similar in your newspaper? He asked. Liz laughed. I have something like that right here at home, she replied. I use it to convert audio to text. It's not 100% accurate, and I usually have to check and correct mistakes, but it's much faster than trying to type as I listen. How much material do you have? Probably hundreds of hours of video, I think, John replied. Well, bring everything here, and I'll start working, she suggested. I can help if possible, Jenny offered. John and Liz agreed. By the way, I need to get busy with my studies, so if you don't mind, I'll go, Jenny said. Okay, honey, John said. Jenny stood up, kissed her father and Liz on the cheek, and headed to her room. Liz waited until the door closed before speaking. Your daughter is a wonderful girl, Liz said. I agree, John replied. She'll make a great lawyer, I think. Liz added, I think you're right. John stood up and helped Liz clear the table, rinsing the dishes before putting them in the dishwasher. Liz looked like she was about to cry. Are you okay? He asked, hugging her. "I'm just not used to a man in the house," she said. John held her as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I haven't been in this situation for a long time either," he replied. Liz kissed him on the lips before pouring them each a glass of wine. They sat down on the sofa and continued their conversation. "So, what's next?" she asked. "Well, your brother and I will continue digging around to see what we can find. If my hunch is correct, D. Silva will deal with Robert himself," he replied. "So you know Ben is my brother?" Liz asked. "Yes, he told me about it," John said. "I probably should have told you earlier, but I wanted to get to know you better first." Liz explained, "I owe your brother a debt I can never repay." John said, "He was the one who supported me when this all started 10 years ago." "I understand," Liz said. "He helped me a lot too. I couldn't have gotten through the divorce without him." Changing the subject, John asked, "Do you think D. Silva could kill your brother?" "I don't know," Liz replied. "I know that they are afraid of him for good reason. At best, he could destroy Robert's career and possibly my father's." "I'll do the best I can," Liz said. "My editor gave me the green light to investigate Robert, but I have to be careful. I don't want this to look like a personal vendetta, and I certainly don't want to give rise to a lawsuit against the newspaper." "Can I use a video from 10 years ago?" John asked. "Perhaps," Liz replied. "Of course, we cannot publish the video in the newspaper, but we can use it on the website and also print screenshots from it. You will need to be very careful when serving it. Let me discuss this with my editor first. I'll do it tomorrow, but I think we need to build up to it little by little, starting with the other materials we have." "Okay," John agreed. "If your editor agrees, I think it will end Robert's career." He glanced at his watch. "I think it's time for me to say goodnight to my daughter and go home. Thank you for a wonderful dinner." Liz hugged John and kissed him. "Maybe someday you'll stay for dessert," she suggested. "I would like that," he replied. They shook hands when Jenny entered the room. "Okay, you too," she said. "Honestly, you can't take either of you anywhere." John stood up, kissed Liz goodbye, and then hugged his daughter. "Good night, princess," he said. "I'll see you tomorrow night." "Okay, Dad," she replied. "Sweet dreams." The next day, John continued his campaign of texts and calls to Robert and Lydia, knowing it was driving them crazy. He copied all the videos he had onto DVDs for Liz and Jenny, which took up most of his day. He didn't realize how much incriminating material he had until he tried to piece it all together in chronological order. That night at dinner, he handed the CDs to Liz, who couldn't believe how much material she was given. "I talked to my editor today, and he wants me to focus on the cheating first and then maybe use that as a segue into other stuff," Liz said. "You've already given me enough evidence to back it up, and if Robert threatens court, we will overwhelm him with everything we have." "Sounds good," John said. "When will this happen?" "Read tomorrow's newspaper." "I have a feeling this is going to get serious," she said. John smiled. "I can't wait," he replied. Indeed, the news of Robert and Lydia's infidelity became the main topic of the day. All the morning shows discussed Liz's article. An article in the Los Angeles Times accused state Senate candidate Robert Wilson of having an affair with the wife of his brother, deceased police officer Avery Wilson, the news anchor reported. According to the article, video obtained by the newspaper shows the officer's wife having an intim with both Robert and his father, current Superior Court Judge Daniel Wilson. Of course, we cannot show this video on air, but the footage published by the newspaper puts all three in an unfavorable position. Eyewitness News and other news outlets have reviewed the video and can confirm that it does indeed show the three having an intimate. The article also alleges that the divorce papers filed by Officer Wilson named both Robert and Daniel Wilson and alleged that his wife Lydia was engaged in adultery with both men. We attempted to contact Judge Wilson, but could not be reached for comment at the time of airing. Robert Wilson has previously denied any such relationship, and attempts to contact Mr. or Mrs. Wilson have also been unsuccessful. According to the article, the videos also contain references to an East Coast crime syndicate. At the time of these events, Wilson's firm was under investigation for links to organized crime. Officer Wilson was shot and killed in his home just days after serving his wife with divorce papers, the announcer said. We have also been given additional information that a shooting may occur in the next few days. Stay tuned. Delighted, John opened the newspaper. He usually didn't read it, but he had to see the article. There was in black and white, with blurry photos from the video. The article was quite long and described the case in as much detail as possible. It also discussed mob ties and hinted that the shooting may have been planned. He jumped for joy when his phone rang. "Smith," he said, answering the call. "Did you read the article?" Liz asked. "Just finished." "It was great," he said. "I'm glad you liked it," she said. "I'm bombarded with calls now. Everyone wants to talk about the article, so dinner might be a little late tonight." "No problem," he said. "I'll go to Jenny's and we'll make you dinner tonight if that's okay." "It's more than okay," she said. "Bye, see you tonight." After he hung up, his phone rang again, but it was from a number marked private. He wondered who could be calling and accepted the call. "Smith," he said. "Good morning, Mr. Smith," the man said in a thick New York accent. John learned that it belonged to Tony, the man Robert had spoken to earlier. "Who is this?" asked John. "What do you want?" "Listen carefully, Mr. Smith," the man said. "A black sedan will pull into your apartment complex in a few minutes. 2 men will come to your door. They were ordered to escort you to a meeting with my boss. You have nothing to fear if you follow their instructions. Have I made myself clear?" "Everything is clear with you," John said. The call ended, and John called Ben to tell him what had just happened. "I don't think you're in any danger," Ben said, "but just in case, turn on the phone finder app like I taught you, and I'll keep an eye on you. Call me as soon as you feel you need it. I think D. Silva's people are preparing to deal with you." "Will do. As they say, everything will be fine." John followed Ben's advice, and as soon as he turned on the app, he saw a large black sedan drive into the apartment complex. A minute later, there was a knock on his door. He opened it and saw 2 very large men in suits and sunglasses. He also noticed that their weapons were kept in shoulder holsters under their jackets. "Come with us, Mr. Smith," said one of them. John nodded and followed them to the car. They blindfolded him, then helped him into the back seat and searched him for weapons. They found his mobile phone and took it away. The door was closed, and he heard the men take the front seats. He decided to play it cool and stay quiet as they drove. He counted the seconds in his head, noting the turns, hoping to get some idea of where he was going. After about 45 minutes, he felt the car stop. The men got out and opened the door. One man held his hand as they walked away from the car. He heard a metal door open, and he was ushered inside. After the door closed, the man removed his blindfold. As his eyes adjusted to the darkened room, he saw a man of average build approaching him. The man extended his hand, and John took it. "Mr. Smith, I'm so glad you could join us," the man said with a smile. "My name is Mario D. Silva. Perhaps you have heard of me? Please take a walk with me." John followed him as he entered another room. There were Robert, Lydia, and Dan. They sat on the cold concrete floor and looked genuinely scared. They were immobilized. "There are people here whom I think you would like to see one last time," the man said. "I'm sure you know Mr. and Mrs. Robert Wilson, as well as Supreme Court Justice Dan Wilson." "Yes, I know them," John said. They all looked at him, their eyes begging for mercy. "Avery?" Robert asked weakly. "Is that really you?" "No," said John. "Avery is dead. You killed him 10 years ago. Do you remember? You and this woman of easy virtue," he added, looking at Lydia, who had tears in her eyes. "In fact, all 3 of you were planning to kill him. I guess your chickens have finally come home to roost, don't they?" He leaned over and addressed Robert. "I just want to know one thing," he told Robert. "Why?" Robert looked at him for a minute before answering. "Because it was fun," he said weakly. John stood up and looked at Robert for a moment. "You know you're right," John said. "Are you having a lot of fun right now?" He looked at Lydia and shook his head. "I was always taught never to hit a woman," he said. "Avery loved you with all his heart. And how did you repay him? What a monster. You're not worth the effort." He moved on to Dan. "And you? You swore to uphold the law, but you don't even know what the damn law is, do you? You're a bigger piece of trash than Robert. You know that? To hell with you. To hell with you all." He then turned to Mario. "Is there anything else, Mr. D. Silva?" he asked. Mario shook his head. "No," he said. "I just thought you might want to say goodbye." John looked at the 3 people in front of him. "Goodbye," he said, "and go to hell." He then looked at Mario and continued, "You know, I was actually thinking about killing them myself, but I made a promise not to cross that line, and I'm a man of my word." Mario nodded, showing John to the exit. "I know that about you, Officer Wilson," he said quietly. John looked at him in surprise. Oh yes, I know who you are. I also know that your daughter is going to UCLA this fall. She wants to be a prosecutor. John said, and I'm sure she'll be a good prosecutor. Mario said, don't worry, John. I have no problem with honest prosecutors who do their jobs. I have lawyers who handle these types of issues for me. However, I have a problem with people betraying me, as these three will soon find out. And like you, I am also a man of my word. I am also a devoted family man. You have been given a gift that most of us will never receive, a true second chance at life. So please take care of your daughter, be a good man to Miss Johnson, and live long, happy, and healthy. He extended his hand to John, who took it. Go with God, my friend, said Mario. Thank you, John said. I'm saying this to you, Mr. D. Silva. Mario smiled. Please, call me Mario, he said. All my friends do. John nodded his head. Go with God, Mario, he said. Mario smiled and nodded in response. He signaled to the two men to take John home. They complied, blindfolding him again and leading him out to the car. A little under an hour later, the bandage was removed, and John was given his phone back. One of the men handed John a large bottle of brandy. This is a sign of gratitude from Mr. D. Silva, one of the men said. Please convey my gratitude to Mr. D. Silva, John said. The men nodded before leaving. John made sure the sedan had left and sat down at the table. He pulled out his phone and noticed that his hands were shaking. He poured himself a cup of coffee and went out onto the balcony to light a cigarette, hoping to calm his nerves. When he calmed down a little, he called Ben. John, are you okay? Asked Ben. I lost all signals from your phone. Yeah, I'm fine, John said. He remembered his meeting with Mario and the three cheaters who ruined his life. That explains a lot, Ben said. I lost all signals from their house. It appears they jammed all electronic signals before capturing Robert and Lydia. Perhaps it was for the best that you took Jenny out of there when you did. I agree, John said. They ended the conversation, and John finished his cigarette, looking out from the balcony. At about 5 in the evening, he went to Liz's apartment and knocked on the door. Jenny opened the door and let him in. He hugged his daughter tightly. Dad, are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I'm just so happy to see you, he said. Well, it's good to see you too, Jenny said. Liz called and said she would probably be late. How about we order some pizza? Pizza sounds great, John said. I brought a deck of cards. Do you want to play spades with the old man? Jenny smiled, remembering the card game she played with her father when she was younger. I've been practicing a lot since we last played, she said. He took out the cards. Well, let's see what you can do, he said. They took a notepad and pencil, sat down at the table, and played spades until Liz called John. He answered the call, noticing that it was already 9 in the evening and they had been playing for over 3 hours. Hi, John, Liz said when he answered. Did you see the news? No. Jenny beats me in spades, John said. What's happened? You better turn on the news, she said. It appears that D. Silva has dealt with Robert and Lydia. Sorry, but I've been doing interviews all evening, and it looks like I'll be stuck here for a couple more hours covering this story. Can you handle dinner yourself? No problem, John said. We were thinking about ordering pizza. Pizza is a great choice. Sorry, John. I'll try to get home as soon as possible, she said. I understand. We'll be here, John said. Thank you for warning me. He ended the call, then turned on the TV, found the local news, and came across a channel that was covering the story. Just arrived at Eyewitness News, the announcer said. State Senate candidate Robert Wilson's home burned to the ground last night. Firefighters found the bodies of 3 people, 1 woman and 2 men. It is unknown what caused the fire, but authorities say they are investigating the matter and have not ruled out the possibility of intentional arson. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson are believed to be among the dead. Stay tuned to Eyewitness News for updates as they become available. Jenny gasped and burst into tears upon hearing the news. John was hurting too, but more for his daughter than anything else. He held her as she sobbed, spilling her tears onto his shirt. His phone rang, and he sat Jenny down before answering, seeing that the call was from Ben. Did you see the news? Asked Ben. Yes, I did, John said. Did you know this was going to happen? He asked. No, I didn't, John said. Were they alive when you last saw them? Asked Ben. Yes, they were, John said. I made a promise to Liz, and I kept it. Okay, I believe you, Ben said. I'll let you know if I hear anything. Take care of Liz and Jenny. I'll take care, John said, ending the conversation. Jenny looked at him after he put down the phone. Did you have anything to do with this? Jenny asked through tears. No, I didn't, John said. I made a promise to Liz. I admit I wanted them to feel pain, and there was a time when I would have killed them for what they did to you and me, but no, I have nothing to do with this. Do you swear to me on the Bible? She asked. If necessary, he said. Have I ever lied to you? No, you didn't lie, she said. He held her as she mourned her mother. John's phone rang again, and he saw that it was Liz calling. Hi, Liz, he said. What's happened? John, tell me you didn't know about this, she said. No, I didn't know about it, he said. Okay, she said. I had to tell the police where Jenny was, and they will come soon. No doubt they will have questions. I'll finish here soon, and we'll talk when I get home, okay? An examination revealed that the fire was caused by a short circuit in the old house, which quickly spread throughout the wooden structure, fueled by piles of paper and old law books that Robert and Lydia had collected over the years. Jenny attended UCLA and divided her time between college and her father's apartment. Although John didn't have to get a job, he went into business with Ben, working as a private investigator. However, there was one unresolved issue. One day, Jenny called to say that his mother, Barbara, was in the hospital with terminal cancer complicated by bouts of dementia. According to doctors, the old woman would not live long. John took Jenny and Liz to visit her one last time. When he entered the hospital room, he noticed his mother's condition. She slowly opened her eyes and looked at John. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Avery, she asked weakly. Is that really you? He sat down next to her. She looked carefully into his face. Oh God, Avery, I'm so sorry about everything. Can you ever forgive me? He hugged her fragile body. My name is John Smith now, he whispered, but yes, it really is me, and yes, I forgive you, he added, tears in his eyes. She began to sob, and he held her in his arms. They held each other for several minutes before she began to tire. He laid her down and smiled at her. Thank you, John, she said. Now I can die in peace. Tired, she fell asleep. They left the room, and she died a few weeks later, but not before changing her will, dividing her considerable fortune equally between John and Jenny. John organized her funeral, burying her next to her husband. Looking at the 4 graves of his former family, John realized that D. Silva was right. He had indeed been given a special gift, and he intended to make the most of this new chance at life.
Part 2 is coming up now. Decide which one is better.
Your wife is going behind your back discussing her cheating plan today. We have a story with a plot like this. Enjoy the show. No need, do not do that, Jackson heard, recognizing the voice of his wife's friend Becky, or Beck as her friends called her. He had just returned home from playing golf on Saturday a little earlier than he had intended. He looked out the open sliding patio door to see his wife and her 3 friends lounging by the pool and sipping mimosas. Diana, his wife, was lying on a sun lounger with her back to the door. Beck was to her right, redhead Steph was directly in front of Dee, and Cheryl was to her left, lying on a towel by the pool. He stayed away so he couldn't be seen, so he could listen. Sorry, Beck, but that's all I can think about. I felt it, and I can't stop thinking about how it would feel. You all talk about it, his wife replied. Besides, I'll be careful so Jackson won't find out. I won't be like Candace. Candace is their friend, telling the ladies endless stories of seduction and incredible night. He will know, they always find out. You know what happened to me. And Candace is complete crap. I've been divorced for 3 years now, and I regret every stupid decision I made because of her. She became my downfall, and now she will become yours, Beck answered sadly. He heard his wife answer, it will be one time, and that's it. I need to know if size really matters, like Candace says. That's not true, Cheryl added. If you must know, in college, I had an affair with a guy, but after the initial passion wore off, it turned out that he was just another guy who didn't want anything else other than intim. Then I met Bert and realized that he could love me better than anyone else, with the greatest dignity. A guy with a lot of dignity exists only because of his dignity. In fact, he is not interesting at all. She took a sip. It's just a sporting event, and that's all. Damn it, no romance, nothing at all. Steph, who has never been married, added, I warned you when you wanted to join our bachelorette party so that you never get attached to any guy you dance with. You may only want to dance, but they come to the club to have intimate. The biggest problem you have is that you've started an affair with this guy. You're dating him, whether you know it or not. I'm not dating him. We drink, dance, and have a little fun, Diana said, until last evening. He told me that he has great dignity and wants to have a night with me. Until last night, I behaved well until he showed it to me. Now that I've held it in my hands, I want to know what it feels like very much. She smiled. I fly away just thinking about him. Beck sat down and leaned against Diana. Understand, sister, Candace doesn't get or have incredible every night. She sits at home like me and is lonely. I know this, and that is where you are heading. I would give anything for a man like Jackson. He is nice and friendly to everyone, he has a good business, and is a wonderful father. She stood up and tied a towel around her waist. This is your funeral, but I want to say here and now that when Jackson throws you away, I will do everything in my power to make him mine. Diana looked up at her friend. You don't understand. I have to do this, just once. Beck looked sad. It won't happen just once, and that's it. It doesn't happen like that. I know, I've been there. Listening to this conversation, Jackson was overcome with anger. His wife, with whom he had lived for more than 20 years, was about to have intimate with some guy she met at a club. He thought this in a fit of anger. He pushed the screen aside, knocking it off the railing, and rushed towards the pool. Diana felt a hand grab her left arm and pull her up. She turned to face her husband. The rage in his eyes was noticeable to all the women. His right hand grabbed her wedding and engagement rings, and he pulled them off her left hand. My rings, she cried. Well, you are no longer my wife, so today, you can go have fun. In anger, he threw the rings over the roof onto the street in front of their house. Go have intimate with your boyfriend with great dignity. He was shaking with anger and rage. I heard everything. I knew you weren't very good at bachelorette parties, but I couldn't believe you were in a relationship with some loser from a bar. Diana fell onto the concrete, crying. Steph stood up first and tried to console Jackson. Cool down, Jackson. She really didn't do anything wrong. Nonsense, he answered. You all knew what would happen when you started taking her to parties, especially you, Steph. He pointed his index finger at her. Since you're all here, help this, pack her things and get them out of my house now. Cheryl smiled, the smile she used to control her husband. Come on, you can't be serious. She gently put her hand on his chest and suddenly found herself staggering and falling backwards into the pool. Jackson, having pushed Cheryl into the pool, turned away. I'll be gone for an hour, and when I come back, I don't want her in my house. Guess what? Steph has a new roommate. Jackson went into the house and then came back through the door because I heard you too, and I'm looking forward to our dates, but know that I won't have a night with you until the divorce is final. These won't be your friends anymore. Isn't that unacceptable to you? Beck stood up proudly. No, not at all. She couldn't help but smile. He was a real find. She was confident that she had learned from her past mistakes. A week later, she got her wish at Friday's bachelorette party. Beck watched Dee greet her boyfriend. She knew him. He was one of those nasty guys who come to clubs to prey on married women. She knew that he had once been the roommate of the man who had seduced her many years ago. It was something she would always regret. She knew that tonight Dee's life would change forever, just as her life had changed. She felt guilty for not trying to stop Dee, but she's known Dee since elementary school, and she knows that once Dee decides something, it's decided forever. She regretted not having photographed this seduction sooner. During the last couple of bachelorette parties, she had taken pictures with her phone to document her friend's behavior in the hopes of keeping her from making the same mistake she had made. To show Dee what she looks like in public, a married woman cheating on her husband. Now it appears she took these photos to take Dee's husband and make him hers. Maybe that's how it is, she thought. Dee didn't dance with her boyfriend tonight. She looked at her friends and said she'd see them later. With that, she greeted the man, and they turned and left the club. In his small unkempt apartment, Dee felt butterflies in her stomach. In 21 years, this is the first man she has had other than Jackson. "Undress me," he demanded as she reached for his fly. Her companion noticed that her wedding ring was missing. "Put on the rings." "I want to see them in your hand when you touch me," Dee replied. "I cannot. Jackson took them when he kicked me out of the house last weekend." "Why did he do this? Were you with someone else?" She went on the defensive. "No, he overheard my conversation with my friends about how I couldn't wait for us to have intim, so he snatched my rings and kicked me out." She saw that this man suddenly lost interest in her. Maybe Beck is right, and he only wanted to have a night with her because she's married, and the man is driven by his fetish. "Don't you want to make love to me?" He looked at her. She is attractive, but without a husband, if she feels good, he will never get rid of her. She doesn't interest him as a girl who needs a cheating wife. "If I can get her so easily, then who can't? Damaged goods," he thought. "Here's the thing. Tonight, I'll give you what you want. You want him, and I know it. But after we have intim, you have to leave. I'm not interested in you hanging around here trying to be my girlfriend, and I'm not your boyfriend. I seduce married women because I don't need affection." With these words, he grinned. He took off his pants and threw them on the sofa. He unbuttoned his shirt and added it to his trousers. He wasn't as fit as Jackson, but she didn't care. She knew what she wanted. Dee knelt in front of him. After a few minutes, he pushed her away and led her to his bed. She began to take off her clothes as quickly as she could, and now she stood without clothes in front of him. He pushed her backwards onto the unmade bed. "I know you liked it," he smiled at her, then went into the bathroom and closed the door. She felt sad, disappointed. Sure, it was big, but the experience reminded her of her first time. Disappointment is the best way to describe it. As she drove back to Steph's apartment, she noted that it had only been an hour since she left the club with him. If she had a night with Jackson, she would be lying in his arms in the afterglow of lovemaking. She could go back to the club and meet the girls, feeling sad and lonely, with tears streaming down her cheeks. She took an Uber back to Steph's empty apartment. Jackson spent a week preparing for his new life. Some people would call him cold, but that's how he dealt with problems, locked problems in small boxes. A successful business allowed him to delegate work so he could focus on what he needed to do. He knew that Dee would be served at work on Monday. He was not vindictive in his proposed settlement. They had been together for over 20 years, and she had been a good wife and mother to their son until she decided she deserved the slumber party time she already had every week. Ever since he installed the pool, the girls would lie around it every weekend and get sober. He didn't mind too much, but sometimes he got tired of them being there every weekend while Diana was having a new experience. Jackson drove 2 hours to have dinner with their son on his college campus. Jackson wanted to tell his son about the divorce man-to-man, like his father. He calculated that his father had prevented future trouble by freeing his mother to find her new happiness. He knew his mother had a different opinion. The next day, Saturday, after lunch, Jackson went home with his son. He hoped that this visit would not affect the boys' grades this semester. Steph asked Diana after dinner about her night with her lover. "Was everything as you thought?" Dee said she was disappointed after Candace's lustful tales and Steph's tales of her exciting life as a single woman. Dee thought she was going to have the best night of her life, but was only disappointed. Steph insisted that she needed the right partner, and she had just such guys. There are 2 guys she's dating, each of them knew about the other's existence, and Steph was confident that she could talk them into debauchery with them tonight. The 2 couples dined and danced before returning to Steph's apartment. Obviously, Steph chose one of the 2 men, but her other choice was more than happy to get Dee. They lounged on the sofa. He was a good kisser, and she responded to his touch. Diana told him no, but he ignored her. She was soon disappointed. Is this her future? Incomplete pleasure with men who seem to only want pleasure for themselves without regard for her pleasure? She wriggled out from under him, went to the bathroom, and began to shower. "I just wanted to wash it off," she felt dirty. She had intimated with 2 different men in 2 nights, both of which were disappointing. The warm water felt nice, and as she lathered up, a cool breeze told her that someone had entered the shower with her. He grabbed her chest from behind. "Hey baby, I love intim in the shower. Do you like having this in the shower?" He pulled her towards him. Because he was bigger than her, she couldn't push him away. She reached behind the shower curtain, looking for something she could use to pull him away from her. Her fingers found a soap dish on the lip of the windowsill. She grabbed it with her left hand and smashed it on his head. The soap dish shattered into dozens of small pieces. Stunned, he fell to the shower floor. Diana climbed over him and stood on the toilet seat, screaming for Steph while Diana stood on the toilet seat, waiting to be rescued. Jackson was fast asleep on the couch. He's been sleeping there ever since he kicked Dee out. He could sleep in their bed, but he couldn't forget that she might have had other lovers in their bed. He woke up from a knock on the front door. He was wearing only boxers and a t-shirt and hesitantly walked towards the door. If he had looked through the peephole, he would not have opened the door. When he opened it, there stood the queen of debauchery herself, Candace. Physically, Candace was a beauty, a petite woman with a hot cheerleader body. Like Jackson, she owned her own business, a fitness center franchise where she personally trained overweight men and women. But Jackson always thought of her as a wormy apple that looked beautiful on the outside, but when you bit into it, it was rotten on the inside. It was already past 1 in the morning, and she was standing there in a little black dress. Jackson frowned. "What do you want?" She smiled her seductive smile that always worked. "I thought you might need some good intim, and I'd be happy to help." She lightly ran her fingers over his face, across his chest, and down. "Very good, Jax. It will be wonderful." "Never in my life," Jackson said, removing her hand. "Go home." "It will not happen." She looked girlish. "Come on, I heard that you are no longer together, and this will be fun." Jackson pushed her back out of the doorway and closed the door in Candace's face. She smiled to herself as she walked back to her car. She liked it when a man played hard to get. On Sunday morning, Jackson did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He cleaned himself up and went to church. He was raised Baptist, but he wasn't sure he wanted to listen to a fire and brimstone preacher. There is a non-denominational church a few miles away. He arrived a few minutes before the service began and chose a seat a few rows back. He sat down in the middle of the row so that others wouldn't have to crawl over him to find a seat. The sermon was about allowing God to help you become the best person you can be so you can help others. Jackson felt touched and often felt like he wasn't doing enough for others. He is successful but has never felt motivated to help others. Maybe he should become a mentor to young people and teach them to be successful, leading by example, he thought. He felt very good until he returned home and saw Diana sitting on the steps. She jumped up and started screaming at him, "Where have you been?" "I called. I came to you, and my keys don't work, and the access code to the garage doesn't work either." He calmly replied, "If you really want to know, I went to church. And maybe instead of whoring around, you should find a church. I'm sure there are men in the church you can have a night with." She followed him inside after he unlocked the door. Dee wasted no time in starting to say that she wanted to go home, that she can't live with Steph, that her lifestyle is unproductive. "No, you can't live here. I freed you from the oath that you were going to break anyway, if you haven't already. By the way, what was the intim that you just had to have?" Dee didn't finish. She wanted to say, "I didn't like it," but Jackson finished for her, "Don't lie. I've known you for too long, and I can tell that you've had this since you left here. There is no turning back. You know how I felt." Dee's thoughts went back to last year when she told him she wanted to go to a bachelorette party with her friend. He bluntly stated that this would lead to her cheating on their marriage. It might be the first night or the 100th, but she'll do it eventually. She didn't want to admit he was right. He told her that it was wrong for married ladies to act like single. It would only lead to trouble, and this trouble could affect his business. His clients may find out that she is his wife and take their business elsewhere because she behaves badly. Dee tried to hug him, but he stopped her. "Tomorrow, I'll ask Tracy, my new assistant, to make a list of safe apartments you can afford. I'll ask her to email them to your work email. From there, you can pick up your bedroom furniture and everything else you want." She cried, saying, "I can't live on what I earn. You must help me." Jackson stood his ground. "You never needed to work. I earn a lot of money, but you wanted a job. You've saved $0, and you're blowing your paycheck as fast as you get it. You can't do this anymore. Being divorced, you will have to balance the budget. In addition, there are many families living on less than you earn." He walked her outside to the car. "You will be served on wedding day at work unless you want to go to Ab's office on Tuesday to be served quietly." On wedding day at work, Dee received the documents. Although she hoped that Jackson would not divorce her, she lived with him for more than 20 years and always got her way. Suddenly, she knew that the Jackson who loved her was different from the Jackson who decided not to love her. Alcohol was flowing freely at Cheryl's house on Wednesday night. The girls gathered together to cheer Dee up. Cheryl, Steph, and Dee were drinking too much too fast without food when Candace walked through the front door with a bottle of wine and a bottle of Jack Daniels. "I don't understand what kind of party this is." As they continued drinking and tongues loosened, Candace announced that she was going to seduce Jackson. The tipsy ladies burst into laughter. Cheryl suggested, "Girl, Beeks was first." "Ha!" Candace said, standing up and running her hands over her toned body. "Does she really think her mommy body can compete with this?" Candace admitted that she tried to seduce Jackson, but he rebuffed her. "What are you thinking about, Dee?" "I think I could marry Jackson and never have to work again, have plenty of intim with him, and live comfortably," she grinned. "Or maybe I'll marry him, live with him for a while, and then get divorced. You know I can't be faithful." For the first time, Diana began to realize what she had done, while Dee started drinking even more. Jackson opened the front door to reveal Beeks and her children. She was holding a casserole dish in her hands. "Thought you might need a friend tonight." They ate on the terrace. After the meal, Beeks and Jackson talked about how he felt about everything that had happened since he told Dee to leave. Her children played basketball in a basket in the backyard. "I'm sure you know the others are with her now to help deal with the shock of today's service, and I would like to be with you. Thank you for your friendship." She didn't stay long. The children had school the next day. But before leaving, Beeks kissed Jackson tenderly on the lips. He smiled as their lips parted, a seductive kiss that lasted just the right amount of time. Jackson woke up sometime between 1:30 and 2 a.m. It was a drunk call from Diana. She alternately cried and scolded him. "How could you do this to me? Doesn't he love her enough?" For him, this meant that it was Dee who didn't love him enough not to go to clubs and do God knows what while she was there. He would hang up, and she would call back. After the third ring, he disconnected the call. "We'll call her tomorrow when she sobers up." Jackson waited until 11 before calling her. She didn't apologize for the calls yesterday. He asked why she didn't call Tracy back about the apartment she found for Diana. She ignored this statement but instead wanted to go home. "No. I know that you had a night with other men, so our marriage is over. You couldn't even wait to be served before having fun. I hope you've had everything you hoped for. A week, just a week, and you could wait to try other men." He heard a knock on the door and looked up to see Beeks with a paper bag in her hands. He raised his hand. "Hey, give me a second to end the call." Exhaling, he continued, "Diana, you wanted other men, and I'm giving you the life of a single divorced woman, which is what you obviously want. So, sign the papers. If you don't meet Tracy tomorrow, I'll sort out the apartment issue for you myself. I will pay the first 2 months of rent. That's all. I have to go. Beeks just surprised me with lunch." He turned off the call. By 6 o'clock in the evening, Stephanie was tired of listening to Dee. "Girl, you have to give it up. Beeks isn't stealing your man. You don't want to hear it, but you were the one who wanted to try that guy, and you got him." What did Jackson get? He realized that he didn't have what his wife of 20-some years wanted. "Sorry, sister, but no man would want that. The Jackson I know won't take you back." Dee didn't want to hear it at all. "But you didn't try to stop me." Stephanie looked at her strangely. "Why?" When you want something, you go and get it. You've always been like this. Besides, I'm A, and I know it. You screwed up, and you want Jackson to pretend it never happened. You should be glad he doesn't know about the other things you did. Change into something nice, and let's cheer you up. 2 weeks passed, and Dee had several new and disappointing lovers. On Monday night after work, Bert and Cheryl took Dee to see the apartment Jackson had rented for her. He furnished the apartment with furniture from the master bedroom and all her favorite things from home. Everything was freshly painted and cleaned, even the refrigerator was full. Bert was a good husband and brought her clothes into the apartment. As Cheryl asked, he hung up what needed hanging and opened the plastic containers that held folded clothes. He left and returned with food. They spent the evening with Dee so Cheryl could ease Dee's loneliness on her first night in the apartment. Cheryl knew that her friend was trying to drag out the divorce in the hope that her husband would suddenly miss her so much that he would forgive her and take her back to her fairy tale life. She would never have told Dee that she knew that Beeks had lunch with Jackson several times a week. The longer this goes on, the worse Dee gets. Cheryl suggested having a housewarming bachelorette party at Dee's new apartment on Friday. Beeks answered the call. It was Cheryl. "Hello, sister. We're meeting on Friday at Dee's new apartment. Please come. I haven't seen you for several weeks." She paused. In recent months, the children's father did not pick them up. He works out of town, so I did not have the opportunity to go out somewhere. It was a little lie. She did visit Jackson, but she stayed there for no more than an hour. I was just testing him. She knew he wouldn't cross the line and have a night with her. I'll see if I can find someone to stay with them on Friday. They are teenagers, mother hen. They may be left alone, of course not for long, but someday I may need to get my security deposit back. They will fight and destroy the house. Jackson looked forward to dinners with Beeks. She knew from her friendship with him that he rarely left his office for lunch. He is a stickler for lunch from home, which is probably why he has been successful. It's such little things. She works just 2 blocks from Jackson's work. It wasn't every day, but he enjoyed her company. She is Dee's only friend that he liked. He only tolerated the others to keep the peace. While having lunch with Jackson on Thursday, Beeks asked if he would watch the kids so she could go to Dee's housewarming. He replied, certainly. Jackson enjoyed her children. 3 boys, ages 13, 15, and 16, looked up to Jackson as an uncle, a cool uncle who played parrot-pair basketball with them when they came to visit. He really missed playing basketball with his son. These guys helped him fill that void. Beeks didn't have to drop the kids off because Jackson showed up and took them to the baseball fields and go-kart racing. She paused and took a breath before knocking. "Come in," she heard through the door. Peering through the door, she saw Cheryl and Steph with their glasses of wine raised, but before she could walk through the doorway, Candace pushed past her into the room. "Hey," Candace barked. She was already under pressure. She heard the toilet flush, and Dee came into the room. There was tension between Beeks and Dee, unspoken for now, but it wouldn't last all evening. After drinking wine and whiskey, tongues loosened. Drunken Cheryl believed that they should all help Dee get back to Jax. This hurt Beeks inside. She had real feelings for Jackson, not Jack, but Jackson. A tipsy Candace told the girls that Dee couldn't get him back until she had intim with him. She stated that when she paid him, he felt nice in her hands, not too big but not too small, her perfect size for optimal pleasure, as she called it. Beeks called her out for talking like that, but Candace replied, "Oh, that's right. Little mommy has plans for Jaxie. Do you think you can get him? Mommy needs a daddy for her children, and he is an empty nest. Why should he raise your children?" She knew that her friends were superficial. Her ex always liked to point this out to her, but hearing Candace talk about her Jackson like that was too much. Before she could argue with Candace, Dee pulled back her hair and shouted at her, "Stay away from my husband, Beeks. He's mine, so get thee away from him. I saw you leaving his office several times when I drove by during lunch." Dee pushed Beeks towards the door. At the open door, Beeks expressed her thoughts to her friends for the first time in her life. "Cold. I understood everything, Dee, but he is no longer yours. You threw him away, preferring other men to him. He doesn't deserve this. Remember, I know how many men you've pleased below the belt at bachelorette parties. Steph says you've tried a lot of men since you moved in with her. Cheryl, you think you can have a boyfriend anytime because Bert knows his wife is taller than him, and that may be true, but cheating is not okay. I learned this the hard way. You never had children because you didn't want a mom body, but it's an honor you'll never know. Steph is so shallow that she will never marry. No man needs a woman like you. Of course, they will invite you on dates with the obligatory continuation, but they don't need you for anything else. And Candace, if every man you had intim with could stick out of your body like a needle, you'd look like a porcupine. After a pause, she continued, I'm not chasing Jackson. I'm trying to give him the space he needs, but now the cards are open. I'll come for your husband, D. Know that when he becomes mine, he will never think about either of you again. I have learned from my own experience that a good husband is very, very difficult to find. He will never regret being with me. I promise that. With these words, she left, slamming the door. Beeks went home and sat in her empty apartment for half an hour. The boys were with Jackson, and she didn't want to be alone. She took out her phone and dialed Jackson's number. He told her to come down, their turn at the baseball practice booth would be in half an hour. He joked that his fifth place hurt after go-karting. She found Jackson and her children in the outfield baseball booth. She sat down on a bench behind the fence. Her older sons did not need his guidance, but the youngest did. She smiled as she watched her father spend time with them. Jackson smiled the entire time. His smile grew even wider when he saw her watching them. He motioned for her to come inside. Silently handing her a baseball helmet, she shook her head, but the children insisted, and here she stands with a bat on her shoulder and swings for innings, missing every one of them. Jackson slid behind her and took the bat off her shoulder. He told her to bend her knees and helped her swing for the next pitch. To her surprise, she hit the ball. Not a hit, but not a miss either. She felt so safe with Jackson pressed against her from behind, helping her prepare for her swing. She felt her pulse begin to quicken. She never managed to hit the ball on her own, but it was the most fun she'd had in years. She laughed until she cried. She will always remember this evening as the one when she realized that she loved Jackson. Jackson smiled as he followed Beeks's car to her apartment. She told Jackson that he didn't have to follow them home, but he just smiled. He helped her get the boys and carry their things into the apartment and then asked if she wanted to have breakfast with him the next morning, and she agreed. While driving back home, he received a message from Bert. It seems that the girls left Dee's apartment to go to the club. They were stopped on the road, and they ended up in the sobering station. He told Bert that everything depended on him, but he decided that they needed a lesson and did not pull them out. Looks like drunk driving increased your insurance. He wondered if Diana was the driver. Over breakfast, Jackson and Beeks continued to bond as a couple. She told him about the previous evening at Dee's and what she said there. He thought it was funny that she told them off. He wondered why she left so early but hoped she did it for his sake. He knew it was selfish, but everyone wants something like that. He wanted to be honest with her. I'll be honest with you. Last night when I held you in the batting cage, it felt right. I think maybe you felt it too, she nodded in agreement. I felt safe and protected, she blushed as she said this. To be honest, I already fell in love with you many years ago. Well, I think I'm in love with you. I know that you are married, but I will wait for you as long as necessary. She dug into her purse and pulled out an envelope. I know I have a story, and you know what it is. The day you kicked Dee out, I said I would do anything to be with you. I knew you would need something specific to show my intentions. The following Monday, I got tested for STDs. You will see that I'm clean. I haven't had intimacy with a man for over a year, to be honest. He was so proud of her honesty. Beeks, I know you made mistakes. I was there in the days before your divorce, and I saw the regret. I knew that you were always a good person, but I still didn't understand why you continued nightly dates when it led to divorce. She looked down. You don't understand now, and I hope you never understand, but when you're divorced and with children, you can't date. But you want to feel loved, Even when you know that you're not Miss Right, but just Miss Right now. I could find a better man. Why did you allow Diana to go on overnight dates with you? He asked. He knew she would be truthful. She reached across the table and took his hands. I tried to convince her not to do it, but you know that if she wants something, it will happen. Although I had no intention of leaving with men, I knew that I had to be there to help her not make the same mistakes that I made. He smiled. You seem to suck at this job. As they held hands across the table, he spoke honestly to her. I feel like we have a connection, and that day on the terrace when I said that I would date you, I was serious. You've always been the best of her friends, and I enjoy our conversations. I look forward to our lunches and phone calls. You tell me off when I say stupid things and make me laugh. You're also a great mom. Beeks looked worried as she spoke. Since we're being honest, I feel the same way. But look at me, I'm not like others. I don't go to the gym. I get judged for my mom's body. I don't have money for this. It's hard to feed 3 teenage boys with what I get. Child support doesn't even cover their food. He squeezed her hands with his. You look great. You are beautiful and curvy. I like curvy ones, he smiled devilishly. I can't wait to see those curves. The waitress brought their check and smiled at the comment. He took the check from the table as they stood up, looked at her, and smiled. So, do you have any plans for today? Beeks pressed her whole body against him and, rising lightly, kissed him on the lips. Well, there's something I haven't done for a long time. It's been over a year now. Jackson stood in his underpants and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He was about to have intim with the first woman in 25 years other than his soon-to-be ex-wife. After he found out that Dee was unfaithful, he felt insecure. Beeks seemed like a hot woman to him. His father would have said volume in those places where it should be. He took a deep breath and opened the door, expecting to find her sitting on the bed waiting for him. He was surprised to find her lying under the covers, pulled up to her chin. Jackson was slightly disappointed. He wanted to turn her around and told her so as he pulled back the top covers and moved into Beeks's bed. You can turn me around another time. When I feel more comfortable, this is something new for me, and I don't want you to be disappointed in my body. Jackson pressed his body against her without clothes. The warmth of her full, large chest felt exciting on his skin. You can never disappoint me with your body, no matter what the ex looks like. She looks like that for herself, not for me. Because I've always been turned on by curvy girls. He placed his right hand on her left leg and slowly moved it along her thigh and up to her underchest area, then returned it to her hip and moved it down, touching her plump fifth place. He leaned down and kissed her for the first time. Her breath caught in her throat as they kissed, exploring each other tenderly until the warmth building below them grew into flames. Their kisses became more passionate, as if they wanted to devour each other. She rolled onto her back, and he threw his right leg over her as if holding her up as they continued to kiss passionately. His right hand moved up her soft belly, over her rib cage to her ample chest. Her right hand touched his stomach as she reached down to his boxers and found what she was looking for. Exhausted, she collapsed onto his chest, breathing heavily. It had been too long since she had done something like this, or rather not like that. She had never had anything like this. Her ex and most of the men she dated after her divorce never tried to please her. These men, including her ex, only wanted pleasure for themselves. She knew that this was what men wanted, but it never gave her pleasure. Jackson put her on top of him and hugged her tightly. He would always cherish this moment. He felt like a man again. He didn't understand what Dee had done to him, but he knew it had an effect on him. He continued to hug her as they both drifted off to sleep. Jackson was the first to wake up. He looked at Rebecca lovingly. His mind transformed her. Beeks was Diane's friend. Beeks was a fun girl, but Rebecca was the mature woman he thought he might fall in love with. He enjoyed spending time with her and enjoyed spending time with her boys. He had no idea how much he missed being a father. He kissed her, waking her up. Rebecca, he said for the first time. I don't know where this will lead, but I don't want to see any other women but you. I can't assume you feel the same way, but I'd love it if you did. She kissed him. I wouldn't want anything better. Rebecca smiled until she saw the alarm clock. Oh, it's already been more than an hour. The boys will be worried. Getting out of bed, Jackson saw her body for the first time and was pleased. She may have thought she was overweight, but he thought she was perfect. "Can I use your shower?" "Of course," he said, thinking about joining her in the shower, but knew that being a mother was more important at this moment. He didn't stop her from getting dressed but walked her to the car and kissed her. "I would like you to bring the boys in a couple of hours. I want to be sure that they don't mind the fact that I'm dating their mom," he asked. She smiled, very caring. When Rebecca returned with her sons, she found Jackson had hamburgers on the grill and potato salad, beans, and relish on the table. After they ate, Jackson pulled the boys aside while she cleared the table. They sat around the fire. "Guys, I want to talk to you like men. I really like your mom and would like to date her romantically if that's okay with you. It's important that you approve because I really like you too. Can I date your mom?" The three guys looked at each other. No man had ever asked them such a question before. None of the boys said anything to each other. The two younger ones looked at their older brother and nodded. The eldest son, the owner of the house, looked at Jackson. "Yes, sir, we would like that." Jackson stood up, and the boys stood up, and he hugged them. Jackson heard the younger one ask, "Will you be our new dad?" He hugged them even tighter. "If that's what you want, I'd be honored." Rebecca began to cry as she watched this happen. Her boys needed a man in their lives just as much as she did, a man who would be a good example for young people when they grow up. She reached for a tissue to wipe away her tears as she watched the younger one grab a basketball from the closet and run towards the basketball court, while Jackson and his brothers waited to play a regular game of doubles. As she was putting away a trash bag filled with scraps from their meal, Rebecca heard the doorbell ring. "Jackson, someone is at your door." While playing basketball, he didn't hear her. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, walked through the patio doors into the house, and headed for the front door. The bell rang again. As she opened the door to meet Dee, Rebecca fell on her back as Dee pushed her into the house. "What are you doing in my house?" Dee growled at her. Rebecca stood up and pushed Dee back a step. "This is not your house anymore. This is Jackson's house. You live in an apartment on Richard Street. Remember how you kicked me out last night?" As Dee walked past Beck, she looked for Jack. "Where's my husband?" "I spent the whole night in prison. He had to come and get me out." Rebecca rushed to intercept Dee, who came face to face with her. "Why do you think he had to get you out of prison?" "He is my husband. This is his responsibility." "No, it's not his responsibility to get you out of the sobering center. It is your responsibility not to get arrested for public drinking. Take responsibility for your life." Beeks was angry at her old friend. Dee rushed from room to room, but Rebecca stayed behind her. "I know why you are here, but it won't work. You left him, and I'm trying to be there for him so that he doesn't go into the darkness that my ex went into." She put her hands on her hips and looked into Dee's eyes. "You were where I was 3 years ago. You screwed up and lost your husband because you did stupid things a married woman shouldn't do, and you will pay the price for it. Loneliness is a hard price to pay. Every evening I return home to a cold, quiet apartment, never again to hear the sweet, gentle sounds of a loving husband and children. I'm lucky to have children, but your son is grown up, and your husband is divorcing you. It will be hard because you will be lonely and at 45 years old, sitting at home on weekday evenings while you wait for Friday and Saturday evenings when you can find some man, anyone who will warm your bed. I didn't plan this, but I made love to Jackson this morning." She raised her hand. "You and I both know something. We both know he's an incredible lover. So caring, so passionate." She smiled to herself. "This is such a rarity," Dee cried. "I'm so stupid. You're so right. He is wonderful, and he is the best lover I have ever had. I forgot about it. I thought I'd have an adventure he'd never know about, and I'd get to try something better, that intimate that happens once in a lifetime." She paused. "I already had it," Dee whispered. BX walked to the patio door. "Jackson is outside with the boys. I can go get him." Dee stood next to her friend and watched the basketball go through the hoop from Jackson's throw. "He is a great father. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed watching him play basketball." She looked at her friend. "Do you love him?" "Yes," BX announced. "I want you to know that today was our first time." I don't know if he loves me as much as I love him, but if he chooses me, I will spend the rest of my life making him happy. We are both going through menopause in the near future, and I know it will change things, but Jackson seems like a man who will understand and find a way to make it work for us." Diana sobbed. "I actually came here today to seduce him again, to make love to him one last time, even if it's miserable and him. If he makes love to you, it's over, and he's moving on. I know how he does everything. He wouldn't do this if I had the chance." Dee turned and walked back to the door. She stopped at the door and turned around. "Tell him that I will find a lawyer and sign the papers." Rebecca told Jackson about Dee's visit and that her lawyer would contact his lawyer. He gathered her and the boys and sent them home. He kissed her tenderly and closed the car door. 7 months later, Dee asked for a short meeting with Jackson and his lawyer before they appeared before a judge. Jackson knew Diane needed some form of closure. She asked for forgiveness for being selfish and touchy, that she had forgotten how incredible he was, how she regretted that she even started hanging out with girls. She knew he never wanted her to do this and told her so. "Diana, I tried to explain to you that married women cannot behave like unmarried women. I knew you weren't faithful to me at the bachelorette parties. You were always seen by someone you didn't notice. Over the years, I received photos and text messages from people who saw you in clubs and restaurants, but I chose to ignore it because I loved you. But enough is enough. Coming home that Saturday and hearing you talk about how you were going to get that guy, I knew it was all over for me. If you don't want me, then let him have you." He got up. "Have a nice life, Diana. You will always be a part of my life. We have a son, and there will be times like birthdays and holidays when we see each other. I will be polite and friendly. I will be available in case of emergency. But we will never sleep in the same bed again. I've always been a one-woman man, and that will never change." He closed the door behind him, and Diana burst into tears. What do you think of the situation our current protagonist is in? Would you do the same? Write your opinion in the comments. See you in the next video.